I fuck with RTG. I think he's smart. I like his information. I think he got way more information than I do. I'm real strategic with what I look for. I don't indulge in everything. I'm real picky with the information I look for. So I look at RTG like he one of them people.
What's up? What's up? What's up? Mic check. Mic check. Where's my So right now I got what's it called? I got this journal, this article written about Ibn Khaldun. I've been listening to Al Muqaddimah, and I've read it in the past. I've read portions of it. Um, and I'm trying to see why they call him the first sociologist, because to me it's really a philosophical book. And yeah, he does record what's going on in the world at the time, as far as like different like ethnic groups and quote unquote races of people. But I guess you could call it his work qualitative. It's not so much quantitative. He's not really giving you any data or statistics, but he's kind of just walking you through what the world looks like at the time, and you can get ideas of the social hierarchies amongst the different groups of people just by reading his work or listening to his work. It's on YouTube. The full audiobook is on there. Um, there are a number of excerpts, which when I see them, I know what they're talking about when they talk about Negroes acting a certain way. I know I know what he's talking about. The issue is because he's a scholar, right? Because he's supposed to be a scholar, the first sociologist, this philosopher. He's really not supposed to say things that are insensitive. But I did see on Reddit, because I was reading like a Reddit thread, there were people referencing him speaking similarly about Arab people as well. So, I mean, you know, when I watch, for example, the old videos too, you go and you watch the old videos of like how black people would express themselves in the 90s, it was filled with like a lot of emotion and stuff. And I just feel like now um, it's very important to not be like baited into like getting upset about certain things. It's like I be seeing a lot of videos. They're like white women now that be trying to be racist, and I'm just like, yo, like shit is not even effective, especially coming from a white woman. Um, but anyway, I need like let me play you guys a little preview. I've been listening to The Prince by Machiavelli. I read that in high school, but back in high school, I'm like, what is this? You know? Um, and when I read it now, I'm kind of at the same point where I'm like, all right, like he's kind of just giving you general philosophy of ruling powers, you know? And for the most part, it's very general. And it's almost like it would seem like common sense now. But anyway, here's the book by Ibn Khaldun. Let me see if I could share this. Share it with the audio. Let's see what he's saying about black people. Oh, all right. This is What chapter is this? This is part 2, chapter 1. Where's the audio? Now it don't want to load. Come on, man. All right, we're gonna try this again. Yeah, this is human civilization in general. All right, now it's playing. All right, here we go.
Questions. And because your teacher and your textbooks skip those important in-between steps, you lose valuable study time. Google.
Yo, what the heck? All right, I don't know what's up with the video. It's crazy the advertisement gonna play, but the video's not gonna play. But anyway, the video is basically the full version of this article. So this article is by Cedric Dover. It's about 13 pages. I'm gonna try to get through these 13 pages, knock it out, see what he's saying. Maybe in between, I'll probably take some breaks and let the video play. Because the video's working now without the audio. So I'll get that up. I'll get the video to play. And I'll just be going back and forth, giving commentary on what he's saying. Obviously, a lot of people know about this part because it makes him look racist. And, you know, if he is, he is. If he's not, then he's not. I'm not trying to push it or pull it whichever way.
Moderation, and you find them at the height of moderation in their homes, clothing, food, and crafts, constructing houses made of well crafted stone, and excelling in the quality of tools and utensils.
All right, I'm not going to keep doing this. That doesn't even make sense why it's doing that.
Striving for excellence in that. They possess natural minerals such as gold, silver, iron, copper, lead, and tin, and they conduct their transactions using the two precious currencies.
All right.
Avoiding deviation.
So I'm not going to keep dealing with that. I'm going to go into this reading, see if we can learn from it. Hopefully this writer, this author is non-biased. I think I'll be able to pick up on it. Let's see his name. Cedric Dover. Sounds like an American or a British dude. All right, let's see what he's talking about. All right, the racial philosophy of Ibn Khaldun. So Ibn Khaldun lived 1332 to 1406, an adventurous Tunisian scholar who took diplomacy for his profession in the world for his province. His life in the impressive understatement of Deslan or Deslain was tres agiti, but he survived continuous misfortunes, sometimes amounting to catastrophes, through savoir-faire, impressive learning, and the driving quality of a man bent upon shaping his knowledge and experience into a composite whole. Wow, that's some very high praise right there. Very high praise. This surge, as Schmidt says, had, you know what? I really need to get this chump on here to listen to this because this nigga don't read. You should be up and listening to this. This urge, as Schmidt says, had brought him into touch with Pedro the Cruel in the west and Timur the Lame in the east. All right, let's see who Pedro the Cruel is. Pedro the Cruel. Okay, Pedro the Cruel. Let's see. This is who they're saying it is right here. Peter of Castile. So that they're saying this is the West. Um, King of Castile and Leon, which we would know is uh, Spain. The last ruler of the main branch of the House of Ivrea. He was excommunicated by Pope Urban V for his persecutions and cruelties committed against the clergy. Mm. All right, so we gotta figure out later why they call this dude the Cruel. But I guess he had some beef with the clergy. I know back then, I think, if I'm not mistaken, the king was separate from the clergy, but in many ways relied on the clergy because the clergy had influence. And through that influence, the clergy had power. Um, I don't know. I don't think the clergy had so much legal power, but the king relied on the clergy uh, for that influence over the people. Separate, but dependent. All right, and then you got Timur the Lame. Let's see who this is. Timur the Lame. All right, Timur, former emir of the Timurid Empire. So these are both. Is Peter the Cruel Muslim? I gotta see if he's Muslim. It doesn't sound like he is, according to his name. But the time frame. Let me go back and see. 1350 to 1366. Why? Okay. What's going on there? We got to find out what's going on in these kingdoms at this time as it pertains to their relations with the Muslims. What's going on in Castile and Leon with Peter the Cruel? Why do they call him that? And where are the Muslims at this time?
I've gathered some details about Peter the Cruel and the context of Muslims in Castile and Leon during his time. Peter, also known as Pedro, ruled Castile and Leon from 1350 to 1369. He was called the Cruel or the Just, depending on perspectives.
Wow.
Some viewed him as a protector of the Jews and a fair ruler over common people, while others saw him as brutally persecuting his enemies, including the clergy and Jews. His rival Henry II of Castile often tried to portray him as king of the Jews and exploited anti-Semitic sentiment to his advantage. Amid these dynamics, the Islamic presence had diminished following events like the Battle of Las Navas de Tolosa in 1212, which marked a significant defeat of Muslim forces. By that time, Christian forces were expanding their territories in Andalusia. Would you like any further details or specific aspects you'd like to explore more?
Okay, that's very interesting how we look at 1492 as like the capsizing defeat of the Muslims, but it seems like the Muslims were declining at least 100 years prior to 1492.
Exactly. By the early 13th century, the Islamic presence in the Iberian Peninsula was already in sharp decline. Key battles, such as the Battle of Las Navas de Tolosa in 1212, had already diminished the major Islamic threat. Over the following decades, Christian forces continued their reconquista, capturing major cities like Cordoba in 1236 and Sevilla in 1248. By then, the Muslim territories were fractured and losing cohesion, and the last significant Muslim kingdom, Granada, was established under Castilian control. So, while 1492 is noted as the year the Reconquista concluded with the fall of Granada, the decline of Muslim rule had been ongoing for more than a century prior.
Man, this history in Spain is like none other with the Muslim and Christian wars.
Absolutely. The history of Spain is unique because of the long and complex interactions between Christian and Muslim powers, often marked by periods of conflict known as the Reconquista. It wasn't a single neat event, but rather a series of battles, skirmishes, and shifting alliances over centuries. This blend of cultures, Christian, Muslim, and Jewish, had profound effects on art, architecture, language, and more. It's a fascinating and distinctive chapter in world history.
Yeah, tell me about the Battle of Nahara.
Sure thing. The Battle of Nájera took place on April 3, 1367, during the conflict known as the Castilian Civil War. It was a decisive battle between the forces of King Peter, Peter the Cruel of Castile, and his rival Henry II of Castile, Henry of Trastamara. Peter's allies, including the English Black Prince, helped secure a major victory for Peter. This battle was critical in the struggle between competing royal factions in Castile, and it temporarily restored Peter to the throne. However, the conflict didn't end there, and the war continued until Peter's eventual downfall.
Where are the Muslim kingdoms during the same time?
During that period, the most significant Muslim kingdom in the Iberian Peninsula was the Emirate of Granada. It was the last Muslim stronghold after the Christian Reconquista. While larger territories had been lost over the previous centuries, Granada remained a relatively stronghold of Islamic culture and power. It maintained a degree of autonomy while under the suzerainty of Castile. The fall of Granada in 1492 marked the end of Muslim rule in Spain, but up until then, Granada was the key Muslim kingdom.
Regionally, where is Granada? Is it in the south?
Yes, exactly. Granada is located in the southern part of Spain, in the region of Andalusia. It's nestled at the foot of the Sierra Nevada mountains and near the Mediterranean coast. Granada is famous.
Peter the Great and Ibn Khaldun, are they contemporaries?
Ibn Khaldun lived roughly from 1332 to 1406, while Peter the Cruel lived from 1334 to 1369. This means their lives overlapped for a few decades, making them contemporaries. However, they were involved in quite different spheres. Peter in the politics and conflicts of medieval Spain, and Ibn Khaldun in North African and Islamic historiography and sociology.
Okay, so they are contemporaries. I just want to line up the timeline. They are indeed contemporaries. So I'm guessing Ibn Khaldun, because it said he came into contact with Peter the Cruel and Timur the Lame in the West. Tell me about these interactions.
I couldn't find specific records of direct interactions between Ibn Khaldun and Peter the Cruel, or between Ibn Khaldun and Tamerlane in a detailed way. Ibn Khaldun traveled widely in North Africa and the Muslim world, and his most well-known works focus on historiography and sociology. While there's mention of the broader context of the era and interactions with major figures, specific encounters with Peter the Cruel or Tamerlane...
I'm gonna do this reading. I'm gonna do the reading with the AI. Me and the AI is gonna go back and forth. AI, I'm live right now, just so you know.
Got it. You're live, and you're planning to have an interactive read-in, with AI playing a back-and-forth role.
Yeah, you're the AI. You're going to do that.
You're doing a live reading, planning to interact with AI. That sounds interesting. How can I help support or facilitate that for you?
Damn, she really not that smart, y'all. Y'all hear this? All right, so what you're going to do, you're going to listen to me read, and you're going to give a synopsis of my reading.
Sounds good. Go ahead and read, and I'll summarize it for you once you're done.
Oh, shit. This urge, as Smith says, had brought him into touch with Pedro the Cruel in the west and Timur the Lame in the east. It had taken him into the huts of savages and into the palaces of kings, into the dungeons with animals and into the highest courts of justice, into the companionship of the illiterate and into the academies of scholars, into the treasure houses of the past and into the activities of the present, into deprivation and sorrow, into affluence and joy. It had led him into the depths where the spirit broods over the meaning of life. This remarkable experience was matched by an equally remarkable education. In his teens, it included theology, with the Quran and Islamic traditions as foundations, philosophy, mathematics, and logic, law and jurisprudence, in literature, grammar, and philology, with particular reference to the Arabic language and poetry. His capacity for absorbing these studies is indicated by his response to an opportunity that came way when he was 15. The Sultan of Morocco had arrived in his town, accompanied by a great number of savants whom he had persuaded to follow him, and who formed the most striking ornament of his court. Ibn Khaldun attached himself as a pupil to the leader of these scholars, the fabulous Muhammad Abd al-Hadrami. the chief traditionist and grammarian of the Maghreb, secretary to the Sultan Abu Hussein, and the officer charged with writing the Alama imperial paraph below all the documents emanating from the prince. Through my association with him, I profited from his lectures and received. Oh man, I should have separated that. Okay, so after it says Muhammad Abid al Hadrami, it goes into like a quote. It says, or like a subsection, the chief traditionist and grammarian of the Maghreb, secretary to the Sultan Abu Hussein. So that might be talking about Muhammad Abd al-Hadrami. Okay. And the officer charged with writing the Alama. Who is the officer charged with writing the Alama, and what is your synopsis of this?
The officer charged with writing the Alama is not explicitly named in the passage, but it describes him as a key figure in the court of Sultan Abu al-Hasan. The term Alama refers to scholars or experts in Islamic knowledge, so this officer would have been responsible for recording or overseeing such scholarly work. In summary, the passage describes Ibn Khaldun's extensive education in theology, philosophy, mathematics, and more. He engaged with prominent scholar Muhammad Abid al-Hadrami, who played a significant role in transmitting Islamic traditions and grammar. Ibn Khaldun benefited from these interactions, enriching his intellectual development.
Yeah, it says Ibn Khaldun attached himself as a pupil to the leader of these scholars, the fabulous Muhammad Abd al-Hadrami, the chief traditionist and grammarian of the Maghreb, secretary to the Sultan Abu Hussein, and the officer charged with writing the Alama, imperial paraph, below all the documents emanating from the prince. Through my association with him, I profited from his lectures and received his permission to study the 6 principal collections of traditional knowledge, most of the Muwatta, law and jurisprudence, the work of Ibn Ishaq, the famous authority on the traditions relating to the military expeditions of the early Muslims, the treatises of Ibn as-Salah on the traditions, and several other works whose titles I have forgotten. In the science of traditions, his learning was derived from the best sources, and it was evident that he had used every possible care to understand and remember them correctly. He possessed a library of more than 3,000 volumes composed of works on the traditions, equity, grammar, philology, the sciences based on reason, and other subjects, the text of which supported his great accuracy.
Got it. Here's a synopsis of your reading. Ibn Khaldun studied under Muhammad Abid al-Hadrami, a prominent scholar and grammarian in the Maghreb, and a secretary to Sultan Abu al-Hasan. Through this association, Ibn Khaldun gained access to essential traditional knowledge, such as legal texts, military traditions, and other scholarly works, and built a library of over 3,000 volumes. His deep engagement with these texts reflects his dedication to accurately preserving and understanding them. Would you like to continue with reading or dive deeper into any specific part?
Who was Ibn as-Salah?
Ibn al-Salah, also known as Taqi al-Din Abu Amid al-Shah-Rahmi Abd-Rahman Shah-Razari, was a Kurdish scholar who lived around 1181 to 1245 CE. He's renowned for his contributions to the science of hadith and Islamic law, and his work laid foundational principles in these fields. His most famous work is the Muqaddimah, often referred to as an introduction to the sciences of hadith. He was deeply involved in intellectual and religious activities in his early life, and faced political and theological challenges of his time, including Mongol raids and sectarian conflict. Despite these challenges, he remained committed to Sunni orthodoxy and the transmission of authentic knowledge. Would you like to know more details or specific aspects of his work?
All right, I'm gonna keep reading. It says, out of this unusual blend of
Ibn
learning.
Salah al-Shahrazuri
Damn, bitch, shut up.
was a prominent Kurdish intellectual in Islamic history.
Oh, she started repeating herself. All right, so I'm gonna get back to reading this. She's still talking.
Methodologies for verifying and understanding hadith. He was born around 1181 CE in what is now Iraqi Kurdistan and passed away in 1245 CE in Damascus. His work has had a profound influence on Islamic scholarship, emphasizing rigorousness, critical analysis, and intellectual humility. Would you like to know more details about his works or influence?
No, I'm going to keep on reading.
Got it. Enjoy your reading.
All right, out
And
of
if you need
this,
any more help or have questions later, feel free to reach out.
out of this unusual blend of learning and experience, Ibn Khaldun wrote poems and literary essays, as well as works on logic, mathematics, jurisprudence, history, and philosophy, which were eventually integrated in his universal history, introduced by a weighty prolegomena, however you say that word, prolegomena, that is a masterpiece of unitary thinking, founded rightly and wrongly on environmental determinism. Toynbee describes it as the greatest work of its kind that has ever yet been created by any man in any time or place. The essence of its approach is contained in the following passages. Quote, the real object of history is to reveal the social condition or civilization of mankind and the phenomena native to it. It must consider the life of the savage, the relaxation of customs, the character of the family and the tribe, the different superiorities which people get from each other, and which favor the birth of empires and dynasties, the discrimination of classes, the occupations perpetuated by labor and effort, such as the lucrative professions, the crafts that endure, the sciences, the arts, in short, all the changes allowed by circumstances to influence the character of society. Whew.
Scholar who blended history, sociology, and economics in
Sorry,
his work.
repeat that. Start over.
Sure thing. The real object of history is to reveal the social condition or civilization of mankind, including phenomena native to it. History must consider the life of the savage, the relaxation of customs, the character of the family and tribe, the superiority relations among peoples, and the rise of empires and dynasties. It must also look at class distinctions, professions enduring crafts, sciences, arts, and all changes influenced by circumstances that shape society. Would you like to delve deeper into any part of this?
To me, what that makes me think of is how it can be argued that some religions brought people out of savagery into quote unquote being civilized.
That's an interesting perspective. The idea of civilizations evolving from savagery to more complex structured societies often intersects with the spread of religions or philosophies. These systems can provide moral frameworks, social norms, laws, and institutions that shape the development of cultures. Historians like Ibn Khaldun acknowledge these shifts in social conditions as part of the broader narrative of history. It's a rich topic to explore further.
Yeah, because even in modern society, we have people that we would consider savages.
That's a compelling point. Even today, societies grapple with differences in norms, values, and behaviors. What one culture sees as civilized, another might view differently. This shows how fluid and context-dependent the concept of civilization can be, both historically and in the modern world.
It is making me think that there's a connection between right belief and your civilization. What happens in your civilization is really dependent upon your belief system as a civilization.
Absolutely. Belief systems, whether religious, philosophical, or cultural, play a crucial role in shaping the values, norms, and structures of a society. They influence laws, social roles, and even the direction of cultural or technological progress. In that sense, a society's development can often be traced back to the core beliefs of its people. It's a profound connection to explore.
Yeah, just because of that, I'm gonna play a quick I gotta play this real quick. And also play the audio with the Ibn Khaldun, because this right here is getting deep. And I already know it's gonna change my mind about the quote that I had on the screen for the screenshot, the thumbnail. We gotta really understand what Ibn Khaldun was describing. You know? To me, his tone and attitude in his writing doesn't come across like he's trying to put forth a certain racist ideology, but it does come out racist. I'm not going to deny that. All right, But errors are let me get her back on here. But errors are natural to the writing of history, and it might be useful to consider the causes which produce them. First, attachment to particular opinions and doctrines. Those who preserve an objective understanding will be critical of the manner of their writing and will consider their subject with all the care it demands. But when the mind is easily influenced by attachment to specific opinions or doctrines, it receives without hesitation those reports with which it finds itself in accord. So a veil is thrown over the eyes of apprehension, attentive scrutiny is prevented, and falsities are not only accepted but also passed on to others. So we would call that like confirmation bias.
Description of confirmation bias. When writers or historians have strong attachments to certain views or doctrines, they tend to accept information that aligns with them, while overlooking or rejecting what doesn't. This leads to a distorted view of history, where errors are perpetuated. Objectivity and careful scrutiny are essential to mitigate this. It's a significant point in understanding how history is recorded and interpreted.
I think it's so profound that Ibn Khaldun is saying this in his writing. Like he's acknowledging um, what gets in the way of a proper record of history.
Absolutely. Ibn Khaldun's insight into the biases and limitations of historical writing is quite profound. He recognized that human subjectivity can distort facts, and that historians must strive for objectivity. His work laid the groundwork for critical historiography, encouraging future scholars to be aware of these pitfalls. It's a significant contribution to the philosophy of history.
All right, I'm gonna keep on reading this. It says another cause of errors in history is the tendency to gain the favor of illustrious persons in high places. Flattery and praise are employed, facts are embellished and then spread abroad. Such writings, tarnished by hypocrisy, receive great publicity, for these minds are hungry for flattery. These men are greedy for worldly goods, rank and riches, and they possess little capacity to distinguish themselves by noble qualities or to show respect for persons of real merit.
That's a powerful critique of how power dynamics can influence historical records. When historians seek favor with influential figures, they may embellish or glorify events to gain wealth or status. This distorts the true record of history, favoring flattery over fact. Ibn Khaldun's warning highlights the importance of integrity in historical writing.
See, now I can see just from this why Ibn Khaldun is so great. Like his thinking, his level of thinking is so damn near perfect. I know it sounds crazy to say, but it is. He knows how to acknowledge biases. He articulates it very well. It's very clear. It's confident. He's confident in his speech. And on top of all of that, he's right. He's right about everything that he's saying. So, shouts out to Ibn Khaldun. All right. So then this is back to the author or the writer. What's his writer's name? Cedric Dover. You gotta see who Cedric Dover is. He put this together real well, and he gave Ibn Khaldun very high praise. So Cedric Dover says he continues at some length in this manner, castigating those who have made history into, quote, an embarrassing mixture of truths and errors, end quote, and demanding from the historian that quote, he must know exactly the causes of every event and the sources of every piece of information at his command, regarding as authentic only those facts which meet all the requirements of the highest standards. The rest he must dismiss as apocryphal, end quote. Yeah, Ibn Khaldun wasn't playing, man. This dude is he's sharp. He's right on point about everything he says. He makes sure he says it for a reason, and he demands of other historians that they can recite their sources on command. And what else? And know the causes of every event that they're going to speak about. Ibn Khaldun is cold, man. Ibn Khaldun is cold. All right. The rest he must dismiss as apocryphal. These texts offer, he feels, quote, an instrument for accurate estimation, which will serve historians usefully who try to follow in the paths of truth, end quote. Modesty does not prevent him from insisting that he has employed it himself. Then we go into Ibn Khaldun. Such is the goal of the first book of our work. It deals with the science wait, no, sui generis, for it has a special objective, the history of civilization and human society, and it treats several problems which serve to explain successively those facts that are connected with the essential basis of society. And this is the character of all the sciences, whether upheld by authority or based on reason. Indeed, it is a new science, as remarkable for the originality of its views as for the extent of its usefulness. We owe its discovery to the intensity of our researches and to a series of deep meditations. We say it is a new science spontaneously produced, for we know of no one who has written a special treatise on it. Whew. Okay. The perspectives offered in these passages can be called anthropological or sociological, but they can also be regarded as being truly historical according to the inclusive concept of history advocated by Collingwood and others. The spectacle of Ibn Khaldun being used to provide sociology with an earlier ancestor than Comte or Comte would have distressed Collingwood even more than it has done other philosophers. Thus, Rosenthal points out that if quote, we cut loose his roots, end quote, we are apt to lose ourselves and then historically. Okay, I gotta pause grammatically. I'm trying to figure out. I keep seeing this right here. And before H word. I was always taught that and comes before like a vowel, not a consonant. But I'm seeing there's an exception when it comes to a word that starts with H, or what a British would call H. And that's throwing me off a little bit because it doesn't sound natural. All right. See if I could get out of here now. Okay. And this is only page 3 out of 13. All right, well, I'm trying to get that fixed because it's being slow. Let me see if I could get back to this video. Let some of the video play. Here, straight from Ibn Khaldun. Unless we got the ring of death
in their general conditions. These are the people of the...
All right, let me reset all this. Hold on. And then try it again.
using the two precious currencies, avoiding deviation in their general conditions. These are the people.
Yeah, there's no reason why I should be going this slow. Watch this. I'm gonna put it on the slowest quality.
People of the Maghreb, the Levant, Hijaz, Yemen, the two Iraqs, India, Sindh, China, as well as...
Yeah, that's not even what it is. All right. So can't blame that. Okay. Let's see if I can get this page fixed. All right, I got it fixed. Here we go. Back into it. All right. Thus, Rosenthal points out that if we cut loose his roots, we are apt to lose ourselves in an historically dubious and unjustifiable modernization by attaching him to labels taken from modern economics and sociology. We must beware of seeing in Ibn Khaldun an actual precursor of representative European thinkers. He in their systems as a whole, be they Vico, Comte, Hegel, Marx, or Spengler. Yet there is in Ibn Khaldun many a characteristic feature of the Renaissance. Schmidt is still more emphatic. Ibn Khaldun would not have understood the statement that he was the founder of sociology rather than of scientific history. He regarded himself as the discoverer of the science of history precisely because he conceived of history as the science dealing with all the social phenomena of man's life. That's an interesting way to look at it. That is a very interesting way to look at history. Because we like to, even today, we like to look at history as like a documented series of events, right? And then we argue about if it actually happened or not, the legitimacy of the historical record. But what Ibn Khaldun argues is more so it should be a record of society in the social forces during that time. All right, so Ibn Khaldun would not have understood the statement that he was the founder of sociology rather than of scientific history. He regarded himself as the discoverer of the science of history precisely because he conceived of history as a science dealing with all the social phenomena of man's life. What would have been the use of his persistent efforts to show that his new science had for its object all aspects of human society, if the vast additions he had made to the province of history were to be taken away and handed over to another science, leaving historians again to pursue their task in the accustomed manner? All right. Nor should it be thought that his history was as scientific as his understanding of it might suggest. To him, science was observed knowledge, directly or traditionally acquired, and his method was deductive. The a priori approach, which we are too apt to forget has produced most of the great works of our heritage, was universal in his day. But as Boutal has said in a fair evaluation, the direction he gave his intellectual resources was most unusual. This is a deep work. This is a great paper right here. The originality of Ibn Khaldun lies in his attempt to apply to the study of societies, if not the positive method, at least the method of observation, which his predecessors, the great Arabic philosophers, had sometimes used successfully in their works on medicine and the natural sciences. Most certainly, we are far from discovering here the critical method which arose later in Europe, nor do we reach the stage of the inductive researches that are found in the works of the Chancellor Bacon. I like where this paper is going. I can't wait to get to the part where he talks about the Negroes and the Arabs and all the spicy stuff. All right, close this out. We're done with the Battle of Nahara. I was going to get a map of medieval Spain because I just wanted to see the division. Let's deny that. All right, so this is medieval Spain. Where's Granada? Let's see Andalusia. I see Castile, Aragon. Was it 16th century? What is this? All right, the map. Ceuta, Portugal is, yeah, I'm not too sure about this map, so I don't really like that one. Let's see if we get one that's more accurate for the time. Dang, this is 1490. All right. Oh, well, I can see Granada right here. Cordoba, Sevilla, Leon, Castilian, Aragon, Catalan, Valencia, and Toledo. All right. So, and then let me see what's going on between the years 1332 and 1409. What is the political situation in West Africa? What are the regional powers in West Africa?
I've gathered some information about the political situation in West Africa between 1332 and 1409. First, the Mali Empire was a significant power during this period. It had established control over regions such as modern Mali, Senegal, and parts of Mauritania. The empire benefited greatly from trans-Saharan trade, especially in gold. As succession disputes weakened Mali in the 14th century, the Songhai Empire, initially a dependency of Mali, gained independence and began to assert its own power. Another notable state in the region was the Oyo Empire among the Yoruba people. By the late 14th century and early 15th century, Oyo emerged as a dominant power, particularly due to trade in goods like cloth, kola nuts, palm oil, and copper. Overall, the political landscape of West Africa at that time was heavily influenced by these empires and their control over trade routes and resources. Would you like more details or help with another question?
All right. So basically, what I'm doing, I'm trying to basically paint a global picture in different regions of the world at the same time. And I'm trying to find a good map. This one's not bad. It's color coded. So we see she said that during Ibn Khaldun's time, it was the Mali Empire that was pretty powerful. And then she said the Songhai came out of the Mali, and you also had the Oyo. And these empires were prominent in the trans-Saharan trade. They were selling gold, you name it. And I know Ibn Khaldun, he does talk about the Takrur, and I think the Malians as well. So we'll see. So back to this. It says these warnings and others like them are unfortunately ignored in the tasteless digest by Isawi. He is eager to claim originality, so eager that he deliberately avoids all mention of the quite accessible translation of Deslain, but his selection only succeeds in reading rather like a dull assortment of extracts from textbooks of sociology. It might have some value as a primer, but scholars will prefer Deslain's slow unfolding of Ibn Khaldun's complexity and roots in literature and social participation. It is a measure of Deslain's success that, even when he is submitted to retranslation into English, as I have done for all the quotations from Ibn Khaldun in this paper, he conveys the sense and feeling of his author more surely than Isawi. The reason, apart from Deslain's tremendous scholarship, is quite simple. The classics can sometimes be rewritten by unusually gifted scholars, but they resist translation into colorless textbook prose. Okay, that's just article talk right there. But now we're about to get into some of okay, this the dude who wrote this paper is basically critiquing another writer about how they interpret Ibn Khaldun's work. That's what it seems like. So he goes on, he says, therefore, it is not surprising that Isawi, who's the one that's being critiqued, succeeds in more or less concealing the core of Ibn Khaldun's philosophy. It is his doctrine of the asabiyya, asab, to bind together, which has been variously translated as esprit de corps, group solidarity, nationalism, patriotism, communal spirit, ethos, and so on. Okay, so this might be a dispute about the translation, the translations. But scholars will prefer unfolding. Okay, Deslain. Okay, let me ask the AI. In the context of Ibn Khaldun, who is Deslain and who is Isawi?
Ibn Khaldun didn't explicitly define Slain or Isawi, but in the context of his work, he discusses the rise and fall of dynasties or groups, sometimes referring to them in terms of conquest or decline.
She She did not understand what I even asked. But clearly, Isawi is a writer or a scholar, and Deslain is a scholar. And it seems as though they both wrote about Ibn Khaldun. And now this writer is doing like a criticism of what they wrote, basically. All right. Therefore, it is not surprising that Isawi succeeds in more or less concealing the core of Ibn Khaldun's philosophy. It is his doctrine of the Asabiyya, Asab, to bind together, which has been variously translated as esprit de corps, group solidarity, nationalism, patriotism, communal spirit, ethos, and so on. Actually, it is all of these things and more. It is a dynamic group's solidarity, bent on conquest and bound by blood kinship, such as a philosopher in the tribal world could easily visualize. Blood ties for him are a natural force. Okay, so so this writer is saying that Isawi doesn't understand, or he's ignoring the philosophy of Ibn Khaldun. Basically, that's what it is. All right. The ties of blood possess and this is Ibn Khaldun speaking now. The ties of blood possess a force which all men recognize through a natural feeling. Their influence leads us to concern ourselves with the state of our relatives and neighbors, especially when they suffer an injustice or their life is in danger. This feeling has always existed in the hearts of men. When two people lend each other mutual aid and they are sufficiently related to be united by heart and sentiments, it is influence of blood kinship which orders their conduct. Right. I agree with that. That's a fair statement by Ibn Khaldun. That is a fair statement. It follows that the theory of Asabiyya contains all the elements of a racial philosophy, comparable in many ways with the superstructure Sir Arthur Keith has raised on his conception of the place of prejudice, which in European literature that is not merely wickedness has its closest parallels in Herder's philosophy of the history of man. It is interesting too that the characters of Keith and Ibn Khaldun are as similar as their views. Both have racial beliefs that never degenerate into racism. Both have race pride supported by racial stereotypes, which is never transformed into the denigration or persecution of individuals. The reasons in the case of Sir Arthur Keith are charmingly confided in his recent autobiography, but the personal factors controlling race consciousness in Ibn Khaldun are not so readily assessed, though they can be generalized as arising from the rich variety of a full life dangerously lived. But the overall controls must be sought in the fact that he, like the other philosophers of his age, was as much an environmentalist as Hippocrates. He could not reinforce blood, a magical enough fluid with the greater magic of genes. He could not invest Asabiyya with a mystic innateness. He had to seek his causes in climate, diet, and social conditions. Okay, I see what it's saying. So now he's basically explaining that Ibn Khaldun, his explanations of certain things are rooted in the limitations of his time. So not knowing about genes made him talk more so about blood, for example. He could not reinforce blood, a magical enough fluid with the greater magic of genes. He could not invest Asabiyya with a mystic innateness. He had to seek his causes in climate, diet, and social conditions. And since these causes could be satisfactorily evaluated, he would not tolerate the idea of innate differences that was already growing around him. Right. There was, for example, a strong feeling spread by travel. Ooh, you know what? This is that's a very interesting idea. Because a lot of us, we even argue about this nature versus nurture when it comes to certain behaviors. Um, yeah, I think it's more so human behaviors. Human behaviors are taught, but your physical traits, those those pass through your genes. Now, some people think behaviors pass through your genes, and this line right here is very thought provoking. And since these causes could be satisfactorily evaluated, he would not tolerate the idea of innate differences that was already growing around him. There was, for example, a strong feeling spread by travelers who knew the luxury and culture of the Orient as against the barbarism into which the Occident had collapsed, that the East was innately superior to the West. But he repudiates it sharply. So the Eastern world is the Orientals, the Asians. This is a very, very interesting. Very interesting, man. I'm intrigued by this. Just seeing the world. And for some reason, I've been really drawn to the 1300s. 1300s, the history of the 1300s is just like, it's a damn movie. It's a movie. It's a movie. The social and political world is very interesting to study how it changes. You know, how things are constantly changing. It's not fixed. Technologies change things, but we like to act like there are fixed realities. All right. So this is what Ibn Khaldun says about the East versus West superiority argument. He says, because Orientals are adept at teaching, as well as in all the other arts, most Maghrebians who have visited the Orient have expressed the opinions that its inhabitants are much superior in intelligence to those of the Maghreb. They believe that Orientals, as reasonable beings, are more complete by their very natures than Westerners. The former show such a combination of talents in the sciences and so much skill in the arts that the differences between the two peoples in these respects appear to be derived from innate differences in their constitutions. But this opinion is quite erroneous. The differences between the countries of the Orient and the Occident are not large enough to produce differences in human nature. We must conclude that the superiority of the Oriental results entirely from the more advanced intelligence, which the influence of sedentary life imparted to his ancestors. Okay, I see what he's saying. He's making uh, a scientific argument. Maybe even some may argue like an evolutionary argument. Even though I wouldn't necessarily call it evolution, it's more so just cause and effect. So let's get a political map. Of North Africa in the 1300s. All right, so map of North Africa AD 1300s. This is from the History Files. I guess it's a UK site. So they're calling this the Kingdom of Fez, which would be Morocco today. Algiers, okay. Tlemcen, which is modern day Algeria. Zayanids and the Hafsids. So these are the two dynasties. Ifriqiya, this is Tunisia. I'm pretty sure this is Tunisia. So this is where Ibn Khaldun is from. So this is only 1 year, 1347, 1348. Zayanids. Then you got the Kingdom of Fez. Three separate kingdoms in North Africa at the time. And then in Spain, we already seen. All right, it says Ibn Khaldun. All right, we read this already. All right. The influence of climate on ethnic differences involves him in a considerable discussion, which we can only hope to sample. In the following passage, the connection between types of habitat and the characteristics of their inhabitants are implicit. The first section of the Occidental climate includes the mouth of the Black Nile. The towns on the banks of this river are all united today under the rule of the Mali, a people of Negro origin. All right, here we go. This is the part that brings up the controversy. Some people go, "Oh, Ibn Khaldun's a racist," blah 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 blah. And the one thing I always notice about people, I know it sounds like I'm defending, and people say I'm defending because he's Muslim, but the one thing I notice about like people who critique is that they've almost never read the works of the person or just the work in general that they're critiquing. Like a lot of people have critiques out of like ignorance or like just a snapshot of something without actually read it in full in totality. Um, so let's see what he said. It says the influence of climate on ethnic differences involves him, Ibn Khaldun, in a considerable discussion which we can only hope to sample. In the following passage, the connection between types of habitat and the characteristics of their inhabitants are implicit. The first section of the Occidental climate includes the mouth of the Black Nile. What is the Black Nile? The Black Nile. And I'm going to guess that's the Niger. What is the Black Nile to Ibn Khaldun? Goodness. I love how the Google engine chooses when it wants to like give you an AI answer versus a non-AI answer. All right, so we're gonna go straight to the AI. What is the Black Nile to Ibn Khaldun? The Black Nile in Ibn Khaldun's writing refers to the regions and peoples inhabiting lands south of the Sahel, notably around the Upper Nile and further into sub-Saharan Africa. Ibn Khaldun describes these zones in his Muqaddimah, associating the black-skinned populations of these areas with climatic conditions, a view shaped by classical and medieval geographical determinism. He mentions groups such as the Lamlam in regions around Nubia and often discusses the impact of the Nile and its cataracts on trade and cultural contact in East Africa. All right. The first section of the Occidental climate includes the mouth of the Black Nile. The towns on the banks of this river are all united today under the rule of the Mali, a people of Negro origin. Okay, so let's look at the Mali. All right, the Mali Empire. Let's see what color it is. Okay. Damn, it doesn't even really. But I'm pretty sure it's this river right here. I know this is the Senegal River. This is the Gambia River. And I'm pretty sure this is the Niger River. So he's talking about the Niger River, if I'm going to guess. That's what he's talking about. So he's talking about the Niger River. The towns on the banks of this river are all united today under the rule of the Mali, a people of Negro origin. The merchants of Maghreb al-Aqsa make regular and profitable journeys to this region. Immediately to its north is the country of the Lemtuna and all of the other peoples who wear the veil. So these are the people in the desert, probably like the Tuareg. And I'm interested to what he says about these Lamtuna people. It is a vast stretch of desert in which these tribes lead a nomadic life. To the south of the Nile dwells a black race known by the name of Limlim. They are pagans who wear painted signs on their faces and temples. Okay. The inhabitants of Ghana and Takrur raid the Limlim and take prisoners, and the merchants to whom they sell them take them to the Maghreb, a region where most of all the slaves are black. So, that sounds like who would be described as like the Blackamoors, possibly. Or actually not, because if they're pagans, if they would have to either be converted to Islam while, like, actually, I'm trying to think about this socially, how it makes sense. Ghana and Takrur, I don't think Ghana is, let me see. Takrur was definitely Muslim. Was Ghana and Takrur both Muslim kingdoms? Let's see. Okay. Ghana and Takrur both had significant historical interaction with Islam, but their paths were not identical. The Ghana Empire initially had a non-Muslim ruling class, while Muslims were present as traders and advisors. By the late 11th century, under pressure from the Almoravid movement, the kingdom is generally considered to have converted to Islam around 1076. And later, Muslim rulers governed Ghana for several generations. By the mid-12th century, sources like Al-Idrisi described Ghana as a Muslim state, though some local traditions persisted alongside Islamic influence. Takrur, located to the northwest of Ghana in the Senegal Valley, is considered one of the earliest West African polities where the ruling class openly adopted Islam, possibly as early as the 10th century. By the 11th century, Takrur was recognized as a Muslim kingdom, and Islam played a central role in its administration and interactions with other Muslim regions. Okay. Damn, not this shit again. Hold on, let's see. All right. This is interesting, though. Very interesting. So, the inhabitants of Ghana and Takrur. So, by this time, Ghana and Takrur are both Muslim kingdoms, because if they both became Muslim in the 1000s, 1076, or, you know, Ibn Khaldun's writing this in the 1300s. So, or yeah, 1300s or late, or sorry, 1300s or early 1400s. Ibn Khaldun is writing this. So Ghana and Takrur are both Muslim kingdoms, and they're raiding the Limlim people. And then you got the Maghrebians, who I'm not sure if these are Spaniards or if these are the people, damn. What's the last stronghold, Muslim stronghold? Or if these are the Grenadians. So let me see if we could get an answer to that. When the Takrur and Ghana kingdoms were raiding the Limlim to sell to the Maghrebians, were these Spaniards / Christians or Sephardic Moors? That's a crazy term. But anyway, when the Takrur and Ghana kingdoms were raiding the Limlim, also spelled Limlim, region to capture people to sell as slaves to the Maghrebians, the buyers in the Maghreb were predominantly Muslim. Ooh, okay. Specifically, Berber and Arab Muslim known as Moors. These Moors were not Spaniards in the sense of Christian Spaniards, but rather Islamic rulers and populations of North Africa and the Iberian Peninsula, many of whom trace their origins to Arab and Berber conquerors. Okay, so the black kingdoms, the West African kingdoms, Takura and Ghana, they're at war with the Lemlem, who are described as pagans. They're capturing them and they're selling them to the Muslims in Spain. That's what this is saying. Could be wrong. I don't know. But it says selling them to the Moors. So the Negroes were selling Negroes to the Moors. Well, actually, yeah, I'm gonna call them Negroes, even though they're Muslim Negroes. Um, Let me see. Actually, it'd be interesting to see what exactly Ibn Khaldun uh, called them. Let me see. Did Ibn Khaldun refer to as in his native language? Let's see what he said in his. All right. Ibn Khaldun referred to black people in his native Arabic language using terms that reflected the common regional and period attitudes, which are often derogatory and racist by modern standards. The term he used most frequently for black people was Al Sudan, meaning the blacks, or the land of the blacks, which was a general geographic and racial classification in medieval Arabic. Okay, I don't really see that as that specifically is not racist. Let's see if there's something else. In his in his Muqaddimah, Ibn Khaldun describes black Africans as Negro nations using the Arabic phrase al-Umam al-Suda. Al-Umam al-Suda. He associated them with the negative stereotypes and often described them as having attributes similar to those of dumb animals, reflecting widely prevailing prejudices of his era. For example, he wrote that such peoples were submissive to slavery and included terms that implied they were less than fully human in terms of rationality and civilization. All right, so I already knew this, but to be real, I so be it. Theosophy had the same ideology. When you say had the same ideology, what is the ideology you're talking about? Because I didn't see when you posted the comment. Nothing new under the sun. Theosophy predated Nazism. Are you saying? Well, I'll let you explain what you're saying. All right, in his Muqaddimah Ibn Khaldun, all right, Al-Umam al-Suda, he associated them with the negative stereotypes and often described them as having attributes similar to those of dumb animals, reflecting widely prevailing prejudices of his era. For example, he wrote that such peoples were submissive to. Okay, so what I was gonna say is, I don't think Ibn Khaldun was like this article says. I think he addressed race without leaning into racism. That's why I want to keep reading and get the full digest, because I know he's saying everything has a cause. He looks at things from like social forces and social causes of certain conditions, instead of, as this paper says, he didn't lean into saying these people were innately such and such. His idea was more so, because of this, you get this. He always seen like the cause to the effect. Um, Racial hierarchy. I don't think he was a necessarily a racial hierarchist in the sense that he believed things were fixed or things were but he did have a sense of uh nativity playing a role in your status or your state as a human being. So I got to keep on reading. I got to keep on reading it, and see more of what he's saying. The next passage is more definite. White skins, as all the ancient philosophers believed, are a function of cold climatic conditions. Ibn Khaldun says this: in the two Western climates, all the inhabitants are white skinned because the air is mingled with the extreme cold which reigns in the northern sector. In this region, the sun remains close to the horizon. It never reaches, nor even approaches, its zenith. Therefore, the heat is very mild, and the cold extremely intense. In all the seasons, from which it follows that the color of the inhabitants is white and often near to sallowness. The excessive cold also produces other effects. The eyes become blue, the skin freckled, and the hair red or reddish brown. So, let me get a map for you guys. To show you how they used to look at things. Hold on, let me see if I can find it. Now I got to try to find this on the fly, on the spot. Learn about Mughal Islam, because that subject is lost to history. I'm tired of the same BS Muslim. I mean, you go learn about it. You know what I mean? I don't mind learning about it. Like I'll learn about everything, but it might be the same BS to you. Then maybe you got to be the one to put out new stuff. You know, let people do things at their own pace. You know, when they're ready to go into new stuff, they'll find it. Let me see if I could get this map. And this is why I always thought it was so interesting. Let me drink some water real quick. All right. See, I was always the one that would look at different sources outside of just like your typical like English Western sources. Always like to look at the Islamic sources. You know, and some people thought that was a bias, but looking at the Islamic sources, you see a different worldview. And if you're African American, right, you only get your history through, for the most part, Islamic sources. Sorry, you only get your pre-colonial or pre-transatlantic history from Islamic sources, for the most part, almost entirely. So it would be a bias to not study those sources as well. And I think it would be an anti-Islamic bias to not study those sources. All right, I'll put this back here for now. I want to try to find this. Oh, here we go. I found one. Oh, wait, no, that one's not good enough. At least not for me. Ibn Said's world map. Okay, he has it. Ibn Said, he has it. So let me show you guys this. Let me get the image. Boom. Look at this. So we could see the climactic zones on this map with the horizontal lines. Let me see if there's a better. All right, so this is just, here's the original. We got the climactic zones right here with these red lines, these red horizontal lines. Let me see if I can blow it up. This is exactly what Ibn Khaldun is referring to, right? But this map is by Ibn Said. But you can see the Arabic map makers during the same time. They're dividing the Earth's geography through these climactic zones, or clines, as they call it. So those red lines right here. They're vertical, but this is because the map is oriented with east at the top. So for example, this right here is Asia. This right here is the Maghreb. This down here is Africa. What we know is Africa. We got Arabia here. I see they put sparsely like all the Southeast Asian islands, just scattered them down there. You could tell they didn't really have it mapped out too well. Let me get a year on this. 1270. So this Ibn Said, he lived from 1213 to 1286. So like right before, like a generation before Ibn Khaldun's lifetime. All right, so we go back into this article about Ibn Khaldun. Let's switch back over. All right, here we go. Remember, he's talking about these climatic zones now. A further development of this argument is as follows. Quote, this is what Ibn Khaldun says. The first and second climates are characterized by heat and the black color of their inhabitants. The sixth and seventh by cold and the white skin. The names given to the inhabitants of the first and second climates do not owe their origin to a black man, Ham, or any other. So he's saying that these basically the Negroes, they're not Hamites. For we have seen that the Negroes, normally inhabitants of the South, have established themselves in the temperate fourth climate and even in the cold seventh climate, but they leave descendants who acquire a white coloring in the course of time. So it seems like he's saying Negroes originally come from the first and second climate. Now, let me see if I could use this Ibn Said map to, because from my understanding, there's 7 of them. There are 7 climes. So I'm going to try to use this map and see what he's talking about would be 1 and 2. And see if I could show you guys what he's talking about. So I'm going to try to count these really quick. So the first line looks like it starts right here. So right about here, 1, 2, there's 1 hidden back here, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There are 7. All right. So again, this map is from the 1270. So this is the first 2 climes. And I know this is confusing. So 1 and 2, the first 2 climes, they match up. Actually, there's 1 below. All right. So I'm guessing he's going to say, yeah, it lines up with like right but beneath Arabia, right under Arabia. Get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Or is it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8? There's either 7 or 8 of them. All right, the first and second climates are characterized by heat and the black color of their inhabitants. The sixth and seventh by cold and the white skin color. The name given to the inhabitants of the first and second climates. The names given to the inhabitants of the first and second climates do not owe their origin to a black man, Ham, or any other. For we have seen that the Negroes, normally inhabitants of the South, have established themselves in the temperate fourth climate. So that fourth climate he's talking about aligns with like where the Jews live, where the Greeks live, where the Persians live, etc. For we have seen that the Negroes, normally inhabitants of the South, have established themselves in the temperate fourth climate and even in the cold seventh climate. So he's saying in the most northern region, so probably where the Khazars, the Scythians, Nordic people even live. He's saying there are Negroes that have made it up there. That's what it sounds like he's saying to me. For we have seen that the Negroes, normally inhabitants of the South, have established themselves in the temperate fourth climate and even in the cold seventh climate, but they leave descendants who acquire a white coloring in the course of time. So, see, my whole thing about that is, I know he knows. Oh man, I gotta read into what he believed about why the skin lightened. But I know he's saying it's because of the climate. But you can't ignore mating as well. So I wonder if he's saying that Negroes who mated with Negroes still over time their descendants became lighter, or is he, falsely misattributing it to a Negro mixing with a quote unquote European or a white person? On the other hand, when men from the north or fourth climate dwell in the south, their skins become black in the fullness of time. So yeah, he's saying, but when he's saying black though, I think he's more so saying their skin's tan, like they get darker. Now the logic turns to the correlation of mental qualities with the environment. Just as in the genetically minded, the inheritance of physical characters becomes associated with those that are still more elusively defined. All right, here's what Ibn Khaldun said. The temperate climates are not equally fertile, nor do all their inhabitants live in luxury. In places, they find only a scorched soil on which grows neither seed nor grass. Yet these same desert people surpass in physical and moral quality. Yet these same desert people surpass in physical and moral qualities the inhabitants of the Tell, who live in great luxury. Their coloring is fresher, their bodies healthier and better proportion. They show much equanimity of character and possess greater educability. All right, I know what he's saying, right? He's saying, man, I think he's talking about what we would call like natural beauty, right? A beautiful color, beautiful proportions, right? We all know it with certain women, for example, that beautiful proportion, beautiful color. This is what he's talking about. Now, does that make him racist? Does that make him a racist? All right. Their coloring is fresher, their bodies healthier and better proportioned. They show much equanimity of character and possess greater educability. All right. The writer goes, this argument enables him to retain his stereotypes and how modern they are about Negroes by the simple process of fitting them into his environmental picture. But note that he will have nothing to do with explanations arising from theories of differential brain development. All right, so this is the controversy right here. So be it, I'm gonna keep it real with you. It sounds like to me, now that I look at your comments, it seems like you perceived the screenshot or the thumbnail as racist. It seems as though you're familiar with the racial controversy surrounding Ibn Khaldun, and it seems like you were trying to defend it. You know what I mean? That's what it seems like. Like you're trying to like normalize it in a way. And trying to just say humans are flawed. Like, dude, that's a bullshit excuse, because humans are flawed, but we know well enough how to behave, right? So you can say humans are flawed all you fucking want to, you know what I mean? But that doesn't negate the fact that we have philosophers, we have great thinkers, we have people who still are able to see, all right, this is not suitable for civilization, and we should stop doing that, right? People get up with their whole climate activists and all this, and sexual rights activists and all this, but when it comes to like the whole race stuff, oh, humans are flawed. There's always going to be racism and classism. It's like the people who say that be trying to like low key, like defend racism because they scared to come out and say they got something against black people. Nigga, it seemed like you got something against black people, nigga. Keep it real with you, so be it. And if you do, nigga, say where you from and say how you feel. That's what I would say to you. That's what I would say to you. You try and hide it. Nigga, I know how to read through that shit. Niggas ain't dumb. I just ignored it and kept it cool because I'm reading and I'm chilling right now. All right, anyway. Okay, this is what he said about the Negroes, man. And I should call this, hold on, let me call this nigga up real quick. I'm gonna get him to give me some commentary on this. Tell me what he thinks. This nigga need to wake his punk ass up. Your call has been. All right, that nigga acting sleep or some shit. But anyway, I'm gonna get this nigga on the line, and he's gonna break down whether he perceives this as racist or scientific racism. These niggas, Pan-Africans, they scientists. Pin that to the top. Nigga, if I was calling to talk about motherfucking Christianity or Jesus, that nigga would pick up the phone. All right, anyway. We have all noticed, this is Ibn Khaldun speaking. We have all noticed that generally the Negroes are characterized by instability, petulance, and a lively gaiety. They give themselves up to dancing whenever they find the slightest opportunity. Oh shoot. Thus acquiring everywhere a reputation for folly or foolishness. Being silly, right? The dancing Negro, quick to get up, start dancing and all that. But I see a bunch of people do that. The true cause of this phenomenon is as follows. According to a principle well established in the treatises, joy and gaiety result naturally from the dilation and expansion of the animal spirits. It has been proved that warmth expands the air. Masudi undertook a research on the causes which produce lightheartedness. All right, we got to see this in Negroes. He said someone named Masudi did this. So let's find out who this is. Who is Masudi? In Ibn Khaldun's writings, where he says Masudi studied the Negroes, because we could read Masudi's work too. Okay. All right. In Ibn Khaldun's writings, the figure referred to as Masudi or Matsudi or Musan Mahdi, a modern scholar and editor who extensively studied and edited Ibn Khaldun's works, especially the Muqaddimah. Ibn Khaldun himself does not mention Masudi as a historical figure. Instead, contemporary references to Masudi studying the Negroes or analyzing Ibn Khaldun's treatment of Black Africans. No, man. See, this is what I say about the AI. I'd be wrong, bro. The AI don't know what the hell I'm even talking about. All right. All right, we got to find out who this Masudi dude is. The name sounds familiar. I thought the dude was a cartographer, but apparently it's either someone else or a scholar as well. But his only solution was based on the statements of Galen and Yaqub ibn Ishai al-Kindi, so he's from al-Kindi, in encyclopedias of the ninth century, who believed that such phenomena were due to weaknesses of the brain from which there develops a weakness of intelligence. This explanation is worthless and proves nothing. All right, so you're seeing other attitudes and thoughts about the Negroes from the Arabs in the ninth century. The ultimate conclusions of his approaches are inescapable. The best climate will be found around the mystic center, and it will produce the best peoples. That is exactly what he does say. And you know, before I read on, see, I keep going back and forth to this map, and I'm wondering if this mystic center being, basically the Mediterranean region, did he also connect that region to these attitudes because of the Islamic understanding or the Abrahamic faith understanding of the origins of humanity? So I wonder if that's also why he has these ideas. But anyway, let's see what he says. One finds in the inhabitants of the center climate a steady and modest deportment, shown in their physical appearance, morals, conduct, and everything else pertaining to their civilization, that is, their mode of living, dwellings, arts, sciences, elevated precepts, and empire. They have received the prophets. They have produced royalty, founders of dynasties, laws, sciences, towns, capitals, buildings, plantations, fine arts, in fact, everything which is dependent upon a well-ordered existence. The peoples of these regions are the Arabs, Romans, Persians, Jews, Greeks, Indians, and Chinese. Now, what's very interesting in that is he doesn't list your prototypical white person or your prototypical black person. Even though largely, we know the Romans, we know the Greeks, and a portion of the Jews would definitely be considered white. But he doesn't include the Anglo, what we would know as the Anglo, or the Germanic peoples, or the Nordic peoples. And he definitely doesn't include any African peoples. But you could say there are black people if you're going to talk about the Indians, depending on which Indians he's referring to. The closest you get to black out of this list that he's saying gave us the best in art, sciences, dwellings, and livings, and all that, the closest you get to black are the Indians and the Arabs. But they're not Negroes. Okay. Nevertheless, his ethnic rationalization stamp him as far more progressive than those savants led by Dr. James Hunt, the first president of the Anthropological Society of London, who added to the disgraces of the 19th century a monumental temple of bibliomaniac iniquity, surmounted in 1900 by the imbecile figure of Charles Carroll and the fruit of his 15 years of study. The Negro, a beast or in the image of God. Ooh. That's a crazy book or study. The Negro, a beast or in the image of God. Damn. Okay. In such circumstances, one can scarcely presume that if the following criticisms by Ibn Khaldun had been translated in time for them to percolate, some of these wicked nonsense of Bible thumping negrophobes might have never been written. Huh. If the following criticisms by Ibn Khaldun had been translated in time for them to percolate, some of the wicked nonsense of Bible thumping negrophobes might have never been written. Okay. Some genealogists, ignorant, and this is Ibn Khaldun now speaking, some genealogists, ignorant of natural history, have claimed that the Negroes, a race descended from Ham, son of Noah, received their black skins through the curse which is said to have changed Ham's skin and condemned his descendants to bondage. But Noah's curse upon Ham is reported in the Pentateuch without any mention of the color black. He simply declares that the children of Ham shall be the slaves of his brothers. Moreover, the opinion of those who have attributed blackness to Ham show they have paid little attention to the nature and effects of heat and cold. If blackness is general for the inhabitants of the first and second climates, it is because of the combination of the air with the excessive heat of the south. Okay, so Ibn Khaldun was aware of the Hamitic hypothesis of his time, and he disagreed with it and said those who believed it haven't read the Pentateuch, because it doesn't mention the color black, and these people, they don't know. He doesn't say science, but he's referring to what people today would say science. He simply declares that the children of Ham shall be the slaves of his brothers. To these comments, he adds this further protest. I'll get this on the charger in a second. The genealogists, having observed that races were distinguished by their features and other particular signs, suppose that they must owe their characteristic features to their origin. Here's one thing I do know as well. He doesn't, in Ibn Khaldun's original work, he doesn't use the word race, because from my understanding, there's no Arabic word for it at this time. He uses, what's the word he uses? I can't remember what the exact word is, but it ties more closely to like lineage, like your lineage, or maybe heritage could be one. But he doesn't use race because there's no Arabic word for it. But there's a close synonym, I guess you can say. But they translate it here as race. The genealogists having observed that lineages were distinguished. See, I'm going to put lineages or heritages were distinguished by their features and other particular signs. Suppose that they must owe their characteristic features to their origin. Therefore, they looked upon all southern dwellers who have black skins as descendants of Ham, and not knowing how to explain the color of these peoples, they hit upon the idea of propagating a tradition which examination cannot uphold. They also declared that the inhabitants of the north are descended from Japhet, while they have recognized practically all the well-organized races as the descendants of Shem. It does not prove that the peoples of the south received the name of Negroes or Abyssinians because they were descended from Ham the Black. It is a mistake to generalize that the people of such and such a district, be it north or south, is descended from such and such a person, merely because one possibly noted in his people certain characteristics, coloring, turns of thoughts, or peculiar signs, which were supposedly found in the ancestral individual. It is easy to fall into errors of this nature through inattention to the nature of beings and countries, For all these characteristics change in the course of generations and cannot remain invariable. Yeah, he's right. Yeah, Ibn Khaldun is he's sharp, he's strong, he's to the point, and he's been right about a lot of this stuff. Huh. You have observed that races were distinguished by their features and other particular signs. Suppose that they must owe their characteristic features to their origin. Okay. He's basically saying that even all black people, uh, just because people share certain traits doesn't mean it comes from the same origin. I kind of would disagree with that when it comes to physical traits. But I know there's some DNA sciences that'll show that there are black people in Asia who aren't uh, closely related to Africans. You know, so I know both sides of the argument. I just, I think I disagree with that. Now that I think about it. All right, let's see what he says about the Jews. He is equally acute about the Jews without, again, sacrificing his stereotypes. And here he brings out clearly, I think for the first time in any literature, the effects of slavery upon so called racial characteristics and prejudices. He adds the novel social explanation that the withdrawal into Sinai was a means of eliminating those who had suffered the degradation of slavery and of replacing them with a new generation strong in endeavor and asabiya. This approach must be regarded as quite unique in comparison with the violent anti Semitism of his time. Ibn Khaldun says this: slavery and bondage break the spirit of a tribe and destroy its asabiya. So we know asabiya means like bond, social bond, sense of self, togetherness. Note the cowardice. Note the cowardice shown by the Jews when the holy prophet Moses called them to the conquest of Syria and assured them that the Lord had inscribed in advance the success of their arms. They replied, "A tribe of giants inhabits that country, and we will not enter until they leave." What they meant was, until God causes them to leave by the use of his power, without the necessity of employing our strength, which would be one of thy great miracles, O Moses. The more he begged them, the more obdurate they became. "Off with thee, thou and thy Lord," they cried, "and fight for us." These people must have felt their own weakness to have expressed themselves in these ways. This cowardice was the result of the life of slavery endured by the Jews for centuries. They had remained so long under the domination of the Egyptians that they had completely lost any feeling of nationhood. When Moses announced that Syria was to be theirs, they drew back before his enterprise, convinced that they would be incapable of attacking an enemy after having spent their lifetimes in humiliation. Therefore, God condemned them to the punishment of wandering, which had as its aim the annihilation of the population which had drunk its full fill of oppression and humiliation before escaping from Egypt, a population without energy, resigned to degradation and lost all feelings of independence. To replace this generation by another, brought up in the desert, was imperative, a generation which had never known humiliation or the domination of a foreign dynasty or the power of despotism. By this disposition, a providence, a new Asabiya was born in the Jews. Damn. Ibn Khaldun got he got some amazing ideas. And I see why the Hebrew Israelites, the black Hebrew Israelites, say that they are the Israelites. Because the stories of the transatlantic slave trade, it aligns with the story of the Jews in Egypt. So, yeah, I can understand the Hebrew Israelite perspective in that sense. I could definitely understand that. It makes sense to me. It's just another thing when you say you're a bloodline Hebrew Israelite. If you're a Hebrew Israelite through like faith, that's one thing. And faith meaning that you don't claim to be that bloodline, but damn, you know what? I feel like as a Hebrew Israelite, you have to claim the bloodline. You can't not claim it. And you have to say that the modern Jews are liars as well, that they're stealing your identity. There is more than a hint in the passages reproduced above that Ibn Khaldun's racial philosophy does not include the concept of race purity. On the contrary, he insists that purity of race exists only among nomadic tribes because, in want and privation, they inhabit sterile and unproductive regions. No individual of another race desires to share their fate or to adapt himself to their way of life, and the nomads themselves would live differently if they could. Thus, their isolation has been a sure guarantee against corruption of blood, and so their race has remained pure and without suspicion of intermixture. You got a lot of interesting. You got a lot of interesting information. This article right here is a top tier article. This is really good. Against these backgrounds, it is interesting to consider his estimates of his own people. He sees them critically, but with pardonable recognition of the power of Islam. All right, before I do that, let me grab this charger. Hold on, play something for y'all, man.
I fuck with RTG. I think he's smart. I like his information. I think he got way more information than I do. I'm real strategic with what I look for. I don't indulge in everything. I'm real picky with the information I look for. So I look at RTG like he one of them people.
What I miss? All right. Okay. Against these backgrounds, it is interesting to consider his estimates of his own people. He sees them critically, but with pardonable recognition of the power of Islam. So here's what Ibn Khaldun says about his own people. These poorly civilized races, the Arabs, etc., without territory on which they can live a life of ease, have nothing to attach them to their native soil. All countries and all regions seem equally good to them. Not satisfied with commanding in their own areas and dominating their neighbors, they cross their frontiers in order to invade distant countries and to enslave their inhabitants. No other people has traveled as far as the Arabs. On the one hand, they saw the limits of their advance extend to the Negro countries. On the other, they created the Mohammedan kingdoms of Spain, and between these two limits all held them in obedience. Such are the capabilities of the half-savage races. On the one hand, they saw the limits of their advance extend to the Negro countries. On the other, they created the Mohammedan kingdoms of Spain. So they conquered the Spaniards. They didn't conquer the Negroes. And I think also it's important to put into perspective that up until this time, it seems like the Western European is largely ignored, which is a complete shift after the colonization of the Americas. So at the time he's writing this in the 1300s, early 1400s, anywhere between 1332 and 1406, there's really not a lot of high regard for the Western European. It might be beginning, but the Western European is not seen even to him as quote unquote, I don't want to say superior peoples, but they're not really referred to in the same respect that he talks about the Persians and the Greeks and the Chinaman, and and then basically a couple generations or a generation after his time, that completely changes, and the Western European becomes really steps into the picture as a dominating force. Look, of all peoples, the Arabs are the least disposed to subordination. Okay, so you're saying you can't enslave the Arabs. They have acquired a roughness of habit, an arrogant pride, and a spirit of jealousy which set them against all authority. But if they accept the religious beliefs taught by a prophet or a saint, their hearts find the strength to maintain them on the right road. Their haughtiness and jealousy soften, and they live readily in harmony and obedience. It is religion that causes this change. Fortunately, the Arabs have outdone all other peoples in their enthusiasm for the true religion and the straight path. It is the result of this simplicity of nature, free from the corruption of evil habits and the contraction of shameful qualities. They cannot even be reproached for the savagery which once distinguished them. Indeed, this natural fierceness disposed them to goodness. And this is something I want to talk about, because he clearly sees it in the sense that pre-Islamic Arabs were savages, and post-Islamic Arabs are reputable people of high regard and respect. And it seems as though, I wonder, well, at least from the Arab Christian view, or Muslim and Christian view, that these faiths bring civilization to humanity. But with that being said, I wonder how they view the Chinaman, whose spiritual beliefs are different, or even the Indian, whose spiritual beliefs are different. The Indian has a religion, the oldest religion, they say. So maybe Ibn Khaldun, excuse me, goes into talking about the Chinese and then the Indians. I want to see what he says about them and how they've reached the Orient being so highly respected, how they reached that while not carrying the belief in the quote unquote one true God. Let me get this back. So, in the light of these, well, this is, again, I'm going to read this again. This is very, look, on one end, he says the Arabs, they're poorly civilized. They rather take from other people than build their own. But when they're exposed to Islam, they excel. That's basically what he says. In the light of these quotations, in which the controls against an oppressive racial philosophy are more than implicit, Ibn Khaldun's particular brand of Blut und dogmatics can now be considered further. Firstly, it must be repeated that he did not believe in innate racial differences. He saw no causal connection between race and culture. Human groups were different, and he saw the differences in terms of superiority and inferiority. But the causes in every case were environmental. Consequently, he could not develop his theory of the Asabiya along modern lines. Not even its dependence on blood could convert it into an innate characteristic of specially favored peoples. Secondly, it should be noted that though Ibn Khaldun never anticipated Hegel and Marx by formulating any clear defined theory of the interaction of opposites, his method of analysis is based on a definite understanding of this phenomenon. He sees history as process and accordingly dissects and relates the elements of his vast knowledge with remarkable force, but the approach itself is inherited from the ancient philosophers, amongst whom the Greeks had given it considerable shape. Yet the fact remains that he used it effectively, much more so than many contemporary writers on race, in that it helped to restrain the unpleasant directions his opinions might otherwise have taken. The actual materials integrated by his thinking were drawn fundamentally from his observation that the world he knew was divided into two major groups: the Badu, or primitive nomadic communities, and the Hadar, or settled peoples. The former were notable for their fierce but essentially good characteristics. Good, essentially good characters, submissive only to tribal leaders of outstanding personality, under whom they undertook their ceaseless marauding expeditions. The latter, though originating as Bado, were distinguished by their decadence and lack of martial ardor as a result of self indulgent living. They were devoted to the status quo produced by a complex social organization in which order was maintained by law and defense by a professional, often alien soldiery. Their religion, once militant, had become mere dogma. All right, I understood like 70% of that. What's up, Kareem? Yeah, it's your morning, my afternoon, Kareem. I'm reading about Ibn Khaldun. The Tunisian, Ifriqiya, the African. It follows that the superior asabiya of the tribal groups is a function of close consanguinity and environmental stimuli. Therefore, the mixture of asabiyas is undesirable. Mawalids, or half-breeds, in spite of some exceptions, must be relegated to the status of bastard slaves. And here he notes it's one of the great weaknesses of the Hadar, for intermarriage increases in direct proportion to wealth and the spread of Islam. Nevertheless, Ibn Khaldun is not more genealogically minded than his Arab contemporaries and predecessors. In fact, he is distressed by the pretenses of individual pedigrees and by the whole pseudoscience of genealogy. But such are his contradictions. He arranges a very handsome pedigree for himself. This footnote says, according to Deslane, the words mulatto, mulatre, and mulatto are derived from the Arabic mawalid, which is applied to cultural as well as ethnic hybrids. In India, especially on the West Coast, the large number of persons of Afro-Indian, including Arab Indian origins, are still known as Mawalis. Okay, we're going to have to look into this, Mawalis. The derivation of mulatto from mule is naturally preferred by some, but lacks the historical logic of the etymology advocated by Deslane. So a mawalid in Arabic is applied to cultural as well as ethnic hybrids. Okay. This blind spot is further emphasized by his belief that nobility is inseparable from asabiya. The degenerate Hadar, he points out, have no true aristocracy. Let me see what Hadar is again. Hadar is... Did I pass it? Hadar is the settled peoples. Bado is like the Bedouins or the nomadic people. All right, so Hadar is the settled peoples. The degenerate settled, he points out, have no true aristocracy. An indictment borne out by the history and excesses of the Abbasid caliphs. Moreover, there is the example of the Israelites. They built up a great kingdom through an ethos held together by an uninterrupted aristocracy of leadership, but when their nobles were degraded, they were driven from their land. In contrast, the force of the Asabiya is so great when it is fully inspired by nobles that conquered peoples become pathetically imitative. They recognize the superior force by trying to ape the ways and customs it has engendered. The consequences are ludicrous at first, but imitation can become integration after some generations. Some of the assimilators can even become nobles in the new society. Similar phenomena can be observed among slaves. They become enslaved simply because they lack asabiya, and they behave like other conquered peoples, an attitude of remarkable liberality when one considers the prevailing Aristotelian idea of his day, followed by the plantocratic view of our own that slaves are born slaves. Thus, the seeds of changing circumstances began to sprout under conditions of conquest, but the immediate effects are undesirable. Vitality declines still further amongst the conquered. Psychological depression grows, and both these factors reduce longevity and the birth rate. The rulers also become weakened through the fruits of conquest, so much so that by the third generation they can easily be overthrown from within or without. The mechanism of all these interrelated effects resides in the initial urge of the Asabiya to rule, and it does not have to be uniform to do so. On the contrary, the strongest peoples are those with many special or sub-Asabiyas. All right, this is page 11. Let me get the, all right. Let's go to Asabiya, the first mention of it. All right, first mention. All right, it is his doctrine of the Asabiya, Asab, to bind together, which has been variously translated as esprit de corps, group solidarity, nationalism, patriotism, communal spirit, ethos, and so on. Okay, so that's Asab. In contrast, the force of the Asabiya, or group spirit, or national identity, is so great when it is fully inspired by nobles that conquered peoples become pathetically imitative. Okay, I read that already. Where am I? All right, I'm going to start here. Thus, the seeds of changing circumstances begin to sprout under conditions of conquest, but the immediate effects are undesirable. Vitality declines still further amongst the conquered. Psychological depression grows, and both these factors reduce longevity and the birth rate. The rulers also become weakened. Okay, I read that part. Okay, here's where I was at. The mechanism of all these interrelated effects resides in the initial urge of the Asabiya to rule, and it does not have to be uniform to do so. On the contrary, the strongest peoples are those with many special or sub-Asabiyas arising from different ethnic groups, ethnic elements, clan affinities, family loyalties, and conflicting personalities, which are held together in a loose but dynamic cohesion through the purposive direction of the general Asabiya. In such conditions, the time comes when power can only be maintained by the emergence of a paramount chief who must largely unify the lesser Asabiyas to consolidate himself. Success raises his status to that of a monarch who seeks further extension of his rule and is then potentially on the way to becoming an emperor. He will not easily be conquered by external enemies while the Asabiya is strong, but to overthrow him from within is less difficult. This merely means the transfer of sovereignty from one individual to another, or at most from one noble family to another, and it does not seriously affect the vigor and purpose of the total asabiya. But the conversion into opposites becomes conspicuous as the peak of success is reached. Prosperity leads to luxury and gross indulgence. Aristocracy becomes despotism. The common people become enervated, disinterested in further expansion, and as antagonistic toward the despots as they are. Yet this stage too is not without compensations. Culture is developed because the accessories of comfort are highly desired. Architecture and the things that go with it, such as landscaping, painting, furniture, the decorative arts, receive generous encouragement. Public monuments are erected and sculpture is necessarily sponsored. Physicians and scientists are assisted. The crafts of personal ornamentation and cookery are abundantly stimulated. And poets become proteges who fail to produce truly great poetry because the essence of great poetry is its heroic quality. All right, this is just the article writer. He's just going off. But culture is also a part of the degenerative process. It accelerates softening. The speed of decay being dependent largely on the size of the dominion. All right, I'm on the 12th out of 13th page, so we're almost done. The greater the size of the ruling state and the numbers of its population, the stronger the supporting pyramid of aristocracy, the richer its own resources. The wider the territory it can acquire and hold, but for all ruling states, large or small, there's an ultimate limit to ruling capacity. Oh, let me plug in this Ethernet cable, man. Forgot, I haven't even been using this. Now, where is it? I'll do that in a second. All right. For the difficulties of rule increase according to the size of the area ruled. The asabiya is weakened as it is stretched. One of the main difficulties is that of raising executive personnel of the same asabiya. Those of a different asabiya often have ambitions of their own that lead to defaults in tributes, and even to revolts and secessions, all of which are more difficult to handle as the peripheries of the empire are approached. The internal difficulties of a ruling state in decay are no less serious. The inflow of empire raises the standard of living for all classes, but differences in distribution accentuate class hostilities. Therefore, despotism strengthens itself by nepotism on the one hand and concessions on the other. The whole structure of the state becomes diseased, with a parasitic growth of favorites and hangers-on complicating its ailments. And the more diseased it becomes, the more pressing are the demands on its resources. These demands are met by increasing taxation, which in turn means more officials, representing an additional burden on the revenues of the state, who actually earn less as their numbers increase through further taxation. So the vicious cycle goes on. More taxation, more officials, more taxation, till the limits of taxation are reached. At this point, alien mercenaries and usurers step in, who become excessively powerful without actually usurping the prerogatives of the monarch. They function by converting him into a puppet, and he retains the amenities of his status by accepting this new condition. That's very profound. All right. Meanwhile, through taxation and high prices, labor becomes sullen and apathetic, and labor, he clearly recognizes, is the source of capital. Eventually, something more than ill-humored apathy results. There is definite neglect and wastage of national resources, which are alike destructive to the state and the growth of capital. Out of this flux, radical social changes arise. The existing traditions and loyalties are neglected and ultimately overthrown. New loyalties and purposes are sought. Revolts grow into revolutions, associated with an entirely new type of sovereignty, having nothing in common with the leadership of the monarch. The old asabiya is now dead, and so is the state it built. There is no conception of its transformation into a new asabiya, no alternative to the inevitability of degeneration. Ibn Khaldun will have nothing to do with the philosophy of anarchism, though he knows about it. The stateless society, he says, is a figment of the imagination which simply cannot exist in fact. He is bound by the confines of Islam, though he is surprisingly secular in many ways. Religion, specifically Islam, can help to preserve the asabiya and give it new directions, but beyond this, neither Ibn Khaldun nor religion can go. Here in a blind alley, I leave him without criticism, for it would be manifestly absurd to criticize a 14th century thinker insulated by his time and place for what he did not say or see, and without further comment, for at least every turn he suggests contemporary analogies and fruitful speculations, limited only by the visualizing ability and intellectual resources of those who read him. But this much must be said. I know of no book more important to the history of racial ideas, and no book more neglected by those concerned with them, than the Prolegomena to the universal history, which its author so modestly called Kitabul Ibad, or Book of Examples. All right. Well, he led us into another book. We're going to see what this is. Kitab, the Book of Examples. Let's see what this book is. That was a good article, though. All right, let's see what this book is. Prolegomena. Prolegomena. Oh, okay, that's by Immanuel Kant. And then the other one was hold on. I know of no book more important to the history of racial ideas, and no book more neglected by those concerned with them than the Prolegomena to the universal history, which its author so modestly called the Kitabul Ibad, Book of Examples. Book of Examples. So I think he's talking about this book right here, Prolegomena to any future metaphysics by Immanuel Kant. I might save that. For another day. Let me see if I can find this cable. All right, it's right here. I'm plugging this Ethernet player. The video wasn't working earlier. It was working when I wasn't sharing the video. As soon as I stop sharing the video, it starts playing. When I share it, it stops playing. So let's see if we could get the video up. This is the book by Ibn Khaldun, Al-Muqaddimah. We'll see. Let's give it a try. Watch. As soon as I remove it, it's going to start playing. All right, so what do I think? I don't think he was I don't really see him establishing so much a racial hierarchy. I think, Ibn Khaldun believed in a regional hierarchy. You live this life because of the environment that you live in. That's more so what he was saying.
The two Iraqs, India, Sindh, China.
All right, yeah, we're not going to be doing this stop and go. Yeah, he was saying the civilizations are as they are because of the climates that they live in, and basically your climate determined your physical reality and some of your behaviors. Excuse me, and some of your behaviors. Um, he wasn't like a person that believed in like innate superiority of any races, from what I see. He doesn't speak like that. So, I mean, some people might feel different about what he wrote about Negroes, and you can see he had a bias towards his own people. Um, he gave him criticism, but he prefaced it and gave him like a way out, to say, well, when they follow Islam, then they're not like this. And then that goes into the whole argument about the effects of like, let me ask the AI. What did Ibn Khaldun say about Chinese and Indians and them not worshiping the one true God, but having Oriental / prestigious civilizations? All right, I'm gonna let that calibrate. Okay. Ibn Khaldun recognized that Chinese and Indian civilizations were sophisticated, urbanized, and ancient, but he also noted their religious systems did not align with the monotheism understood in Islam. He describes these cultures as having prestigious or highly developed civilizations with impressive administrative, scientific, and urban traditions. However, Ibn Khaldun considered that despite their material and organizational achievements, the Chinese and Indians did not. Okay, sometimes the AI be giving simple as rhetorical answers. All right, you know what? Maybe I'm looking for an answer where it's just not. It seems like this AI don't really got anything important here for me to pull out of it. He used such examples to illustrate that high levels of civilization, prosperity, and governance could exist outside the world of Islam, but he judged these achievements as ultimately lacking in divine guidance from the standpoint of Islamic theology. Okay, that's worthwhile. Ibn Khaldun often discussed this as part of his broader theory that the ultimate quality of a civilization is measured not only by its worldly success, but also by its adherence to revealed religions, specifically the monotheism central to Islam. Thus, while admiring their accomplishments, he saw their religious practices as fundamentally distinct from those of Muslims and did not view their faiths as leading to the same truth. All right. Close this and that. Oh, no, I should have left that one open. Hold on, let me see if I can find another example of the Klein maps. All right. Geography and cartography in the medieval Islamic world. I don't know why they're showing this map. This is in Latin. Abraham Ortelius, 1572. Why is that connected to the Islamic world? All right. So they were doing geometry. Man, these astrolabes. This is just, to me, when I look at this, I'm like, yo, this is fire, bro. Help them tell time. Pretty sure that's what it was for. Let me double check. Astrolabes were adopted and further developed into the medieval Islamic world, where Muslim astronomers introduced angular scales to the design, adding circles indicating azimuths on the horizon. It was widely used throughout the Muslim world, chiefly as an aid to navigation. Okay, that's what it was, navigation, and as a way of finding the Qibla, the direction of Mecca. 8th century mathematician, and I bet you could tell time with this too. But it was like a compass. So this is some medieval technology. Didn't really show any maps on this page. Oh, here we go. Trying to find them with the climbs on there. All right, no. Nope. Map of Fars. I think Fars is Persia. From the Kitab al-Masalik wa al-Mamalik, Book of Postal Routes and Kingdoms of al-Istakri. Man, see, I stopped practicing Arabic. I'll be up here trying to read this. But there are other ways to go about it nowadays. But I used to do this just as practice. All right, let me see if I can get a video going. If not, I'm going to end the stream. It's been 2.5 hours. I do not know why this let me see if I can play it different. Maybe play Let's Talk Religion. I'll play Let's Talk Religion. Look, the advertisement plays.
And
as soon as the video comes on, it's gonna stop playing. I bet you.
And expand.
Hello, I'm back again with another episode of that still unnamed series about historical figures and books and whatnot. In fact, since there seems to be people actually watching these videos, if you have any suggestions for names or subjects that you would like to know more about, just let me know in the comments, and I'll certainly consider it. It always is in understanding him or his work in a proper way. He lived in what is known as the medieval period of the Muslim world. The Abbasid Caliphate, which is sometimes referred to as the classical period, ruled much of the larger Islamic or Muslim world, at least symbolically, from around 750 AD to 1258, when, as you probably know, the Mongols, in their campaign to conquer the entire goddamn world, eventually reached Baghdad, and thus also executed the last remaining caliph. And this was obviously very traumatic for the Muslims, as their sort of main seat of power and the symbol of the grand Islamic civilization had just vanished. And so Ibn Khaldun finds himself right in the middle of this sort of trauma and this very uncertain period in Islamic history, referred to as the medieval period, which is after the fall of the Abbasids, but before the eventual rise of the Ottoman Empire.
That is an interesting way to look at it. He lived post-caliphate. He lived in the post-caliphate Muslim world. So 661 to 750, you got the Umayyad dynasty. Abd al-Rahman or somebody, I can't remember. Someone makes it into Spain and starts an emirate over there in the year, like, what was it, like, I guess 750, 751. And then you have the Abbasids take over from 750 to, he just said, 1258. And they're governing the old Umayyad dynasty plus, or I guess minus Iberia. And the Abbasids fall to the Mongols in 1258, and now Ibn Khaldun's living from 1332 to 14, what was it, '06 or something like that, in modern day Tunisia, in the post-Islamic Caliphate world. And then in the north, in Iberia, you got all the little kingdoms. You got Aragon, Castile, Leon, Granada. I wonder if Portugal is unified. When did Portugal unify? So Portugal, the 1300s. I want to see what was going on. What was it called in the 1300s? I'm seeing Portugal here in Galicia. And then the south was ruled by the Almohads. This was 1160 though. So I know later by the 1300s, the only Muslim stronghold is in Granada. I'm pretty sure in the south. Let's see.
And Ibn Khaldun is perfectly placed right in between these, when the sort of Islamic world was very fragmented and ruled by a whole bunch of different regional smaller kingdoms and sultans. Ibn Khaldun then was born in 1332, like I said, in Tunis. And he came from a long lineage of statesmen and politicians from Al-Andalus, or Andalusia in Spain. His father, though, was a renowned Sufi of the time who, when Ibn Khaldun grew up, would teach him a lot about his own mysticism and the Sufi tradition. On top of this, Ibn Khaldun had a lot of other teachers whom he writes very highly and fondly about. His education with these teachers included everything from Sufism to philosophy and the Quran, as well as mathematics, logics, astronomy, all these things. It's safe to say that Ibn Khaldun was a highly educated man, both in the Islamic and also the so-called worldly sciences. His early life appeared to have been rather peaceful, as he spent his time in intellectual discovery and education. But a turning point in his life came when the plague struck Tunis and North Africa. Yes, the plague was obviously not something that just affected Europe, but the entire world. And once the plague actually arrived in North Africa and in Tunis, it wiped out Ibn Khaldun's entire family, basically, except for a few siblings and his teachers.
Damn, so I was just talking actually to OTK about some of the plagues, and I learned that the plagues reached the east. It was in the Islamic world in the east, I think, as far as like Baghdad, and now they're saying the plague was also in North Africa, which makes sense through trade.
Himself except back the world. Yes, the plague was obviously not something that just affected Europe, but the entire world. And once the plague actually arrived in North Africa and in Tunis, it wiped out Ibn Khaldun's entire family, basically, except for a few siblings and his teachers. And he writes himself about this event in very sort of apocalyptic ways. And I need these glasses on now because I'm going to quote him. Quote, "In the middle of the 14th century, civilization both in the east and the west was visited by a destructive plague which devastated nations and caused populations to vanish." He continues, "Cities and buildings were laid waste, roads and signs were obliterated, settlements and mansions became empty, dynasties and tribes grew weak, the entire inhabited world changed. It was," and here Ibn Khaldun evokes a very sort of poetic and yet apocalyptic language. It was as if the voice of existence in the world had called out for oblivion and restriction, and the world had responded to its call. Obviously, this event affected Ibn Khaldun immensely and had a very strong impact on his life. However, it does appear that it also served as a kind of inspiration for his later career, as since the world had been so changed, there was a need for him to write critically about history and society. Ibn Khaldun was a very ambitious man, and like from directly out of a Hollywood film, he is stuck in his early.
All right, so be it. Learn about Mughal Islam because that subject is lost. You know, I just read the comment again, and I did do a live on the Mughals. If you're talking about the Indian people, the Indian Muslims, the problem is, I'm gonna say this ignorantly. There's really no lasting impression from that culture in the broader context of the world. And I even said that about the the Songhai dynasty as well. So I kind of feel that way about the Mughal until I learn more, because right now I'm a little bit ignorant. But I did learn about it briefly. Especially if I'm correct, if that's the Indians, the East Indian people.
Working years with a job that he hates as a calligrapher and sort of dreams about better things to come. And they certainly would come, because he would leave eventually and go on to become one of the most successful political advisors of his time, and indeed of all time. He traveled all around North Africa, working for different sultans and kings. He worked for a while in Morocco, and then he was in Algeria, and even for a while he worked in Granada, in Spain, in Andalusia. While working for these sultans and kings and rulers, he came to...
Okay, all right, I'm in the back looking at the Mughal Empire now, because you got me to look at it. Okay, so they had the empire from 1526 to 1857. So that lets me know until 1857, that makes me think about the Indians that were indentured in the Caribbean, and then also the Indian migrants into Southeast Africa. And then later you got Idi Amin that expelled all the Asians out of his country. I forget what country that is. Which included the Indians, which included the family of Zoran Mamdani, the elected mayor of New York. So I know a little history.
To realize how filled with jealousy and corruption the political world actually was. Rulers rose and fell in what appeared to be very short spans of time. The whole thing was just very chaotic. He was himself the victim of jealousy and some nasty schemes that at some points even put him in jail. But he was not entirely innocent himself. In fact, Ibn Khaldun was obviously a very intelligent and knowledgeable man, and he used that knowledge to his advantage. For example, if he felt like a sultan or a king he worked for, his time was running out, he would often support the rebels, unbeknownst of the sultan, so he would betray him basically. Because of its knowledge of the political world and how it worked, he could sense that the king's time was over, and in most cases he was actually correct. Even though Ibn Khaldun appears to have eventually felt a kind of disdain towards the political world that he worked in, he was nonetheless incredibly successful throughout his life, and every ruler basically wanted to work with him or have him by their side. Even the Christian king Pedro of Seville asked him to join him, to which he refused for reasons that are...
Going back to school was...
not entirely known, although some can make educated guesses as to why. You really start to feel for the guy, as he just wants to sort of retire and go live in seclusion with his family and write and teach. But, you know, different rulers are constantly just dragging him back into service because he is so revered as this incredible political figure, or this thinker. It's almost like in the scene in The Godfather Part 3 where Michael is, doing that famous line of, once I thought I was out, they pull me back in. It's just really just like that, and you really feel sorry for him as he kind of, at multiple times in his life, actually does withdraw, but is pulled back into service by different sultans to his sort of disdain. The last years of his life he spent in Mamluk Egypt, in Cairo, as a Qadi, or a judge. He was actually the main
See, the 1300s, that whole medieval time frame is just, the history is like, whoa, man. You got Mamluk Egypt at the time of Ibn Khaldun.
Representative of the Maliki school of law in Islamic Sharia for the Sultan Barkuk, who ruled at the time. He seems to have been, at this time, actually rather content with his life. He enjoyed his time in Egypt, and there is some very poetic letters that he sends to his friends about Cairo and how magnificent this city is. However, there is, even in Cairo, one does not escape the political corruption that he has dealt with his entire life, and he becomes almost like a Serpico figure of his time. I realize there's a lot of references to Al Pacino films in this video, but in any case it kind of fits because he would refuse to succumb to this corruption himself and would actively fight against it, which, like in the film, created a lot of enemies. Except for the Sultan himself, actually, he appears to have stuck with him at least for the majority of his time in service. His happiness and peaceful life was unfortunately cut short, however, when most of his family, including his wife and some of his children, were tragically killed in an accident at sea. They had been separated for quite a while when Ibn Khaldun moved to Egypt, and they were finally going to meet at last again, and on the way there they were tragically killed, which sent Ibn Khaldun into a devastating depression, to which it took quite a while for him to recover. And this is very humanizing to read, to really puts things into perspective and makes us see the man behind the works, as it were. We sort of start to see him as a person rather than this legendary figure that he is often presented as. He was eventually able to get out of this depression, and he continued to work as a teacher in Cairo, and even there were some periods of tensions between him and the Sultan, which I unfortunately do not have time to go into, but generally he and the Sultan appears to have had a good relationship throughout his later years and career, and he worked as a teacher at a Sufi shrine, I believe. Ibn Khaldun eventually passes away on March 17th, 1406, having spent his life in service of a multitude of different sultans and kings, and through his writings and teachings have cemented himself in the history books. Now, throughout the years of service and his impeccable experience and close-up view of the political and social world, Ibn Khaldun was obviously able to gain a great understanding of how these worlds actually worked. This would all be expressed in the Muqaddimah and inspired a lot of its genius, really.
My advice for new Berkeley students.
I think it's interesting. And you know what? Maybe it's not just religion. I should also say just through contact and trade. Well, religion is a product of contact and trade, in the sense that a lot of times I think we look at certain interactions as being like detrimental. Like I hear a lot of people talk about like the Arabs in Africa. And there's truth to it when it comes to the enslavement portion. But largely speaking, Arabs didn't really conquer any African countries. The ones I could think of the top that today appear to be conquered by Arabs is like Egypt, Sudan, North Africa, right? But during these medieval times, for example, as it pertains to Black people, or I guess I should say African Americans, always push back just a little bit and remind people that one, the North Africans that were conquered, they're described as who we know as the Berbers, and history doesn't really record African Americans as descending from Berbers. Now, I will say that's not entirely true, because a lot of African Americans actually do have DNA that will trace back to populations connected to North Africa. However, historically, the Arabs in North Africa were conquering people that aren't described as Black, at least not by them, or Negro, I should say. And Negro is a very particular title that gets applied to African Americans or FBA people. So that's one. And then I'm aware of, in East Africa, Southeast Africa, the slave trade in Zanzibar. And the Omanis, I do know the Omanis did establish their sultanate either in Zanzibar or over Zanzibar from modern day Oman. So yeah, I know they have that history over there as well. And the whole Zanj rebellion in Iraq, I'm pretty sure, in the marsh fields or the salt, something like that. The marshes. I think that's under the Abbasid Caliphate, Iraq. So I know that history as well. Oh, the video's back. Let's get the video.
As mentioned, the Muqaddimah is just the introductory chapter to a much larger piece of work, but it certainly stands on its own. In the book, Ibn Khaldun really tries to give a comprehensive overview of civilization and culture and politics in general. It is considered a masterpiece that has not only had a great influence on Ottoman society, but also the rest of the world, and still to some degree today. Ibn Khaldun is considered, in fact, by some to be the father of the science of history and the study of sociology. And it is in this book that he expresses a lot of those ideas. In the Muqaddimah, Ibn Khaldun presents a view of history that is completely unique for his time. He simply doesn't want to retell things, not history just as a retelling of events, but to actually study history critically and to look at things from a rational point of view and try to explain them in a sort of a larger scientific context. Now, while the Muqaddimah is a large piece of work in itself, with a lot of content that I really don't have the time to go through today, I can talk about one of the central aspects of his political theory, which is something that he calls asabiya. And it's always difficult to translate Arabic to English, but it is generally believed to mean something along the lines of tribal solidarity. At this time, when he lived, and still to this day to some degree, Arab and Berber society is very much divided into different tribes. And all political and social workings are based on solidarity and identification with these different tribes. In fact, Ibn Khaldun considers asabiya to be the very driving force behind all.
This is the best part about studying history, is contextualizing the events, right? Adding a backdrop to the events, putting things in their proper context, even acknowledging that certain translations are imperfect translations from language to language and even from time to time.
Considers asabiya to be the very driving force behind all of history. He argues that dynasties and empires, all dynasties and empires, are destined to go down the same path, one of rise and eventual fall. This is unavoidable, without question. Every dynasty will fall, every single time. And he uses asabiya to explain this. When a ruler comes into power, he does so with the help of asabiya, tribal solidarity, with the help of one or multiple tribes that he sometimes also belonged to, and their...
We have got to the point
political support. Other factors, such as divine or religious motivations or inspirations, can be important as well. But he argues that asabiya is the sort of most important. In fact, he writes in a very blunt way and says that power does not exist without asabiya. Period. Now, after this, he argues to sort of delve deeper into this theory that every dynasty rises and falls, but it goes through certain stages, which he refers to as generations. These can be different according to, circumstances, but generally he says it doesn't last for more than 3 generations. And the first generation is good. The first generation of rulers is good. The king in this case is still strongly connected to asabiya. He still remembers how tribal life looked like, and he still serves the people in that sense. He is connected to the social world and reality. The second generation is somewhere in between. He still has some memories of the tribal life that his father lived, for example, but he has started to adopt some luxury and excess and stuff like that. So he's in between. It still works, but it's starting to go in the wrong direction. And now the third generation is where it all falls apart. At this point, the ruler is so obsessed with luxury and sort of excessive living, that he has lost all connection to asabiya, and thus also the support of the people. His main concern is to stay in power and not to serve the people, and thus he has been completely detached from reality. And when this happens, this is where the fall happens. So at this point, another ruler with their sort of asabiya and their tribal support takes over, and thus the cycle sort of repeats indefinitely, forever. In other words, it is through a gradual loss of tribal asabiya that rulers lose their power and eventually fall. It's certainly an interesting theory to consider. It's hard to deny that every dynasty and empire, at least so far in history, has fallen, and nothing has lasted forever. Ibn Khaldun here presents us with a theory, an idea of why this is, the reasons for this inevitable rise and fall of every empire and every dynasty. And it is through ideas like this that he has really cemented himself as an incredibly important writer and influential thinker. Now, there are, of course, some other areas of the book where it certainly shows his age, and this is another point to where his contexts really need to be considered. There is, for example, a section that describes black Africans in a rather unfortunate way, and in this section he's trying to sort of correlate what he calls the great emotionalism of the African population with the hot climate in which they live, and sort of compares this to drunkenness when drinking wine, because the body gets hot when you drink alcohol. It's a mess. Now, this is obviously ridiculous and not just slightly racist, but it serves as an important reminder that we cannot separate him. Despite his genius in some areas, we cannot separate him from his time and place. And to consider Ibn Khaldun as somehow a modern thinker stuck in an unenlightened age is highly problematic and dangerous. This not only presents a dangerous view of history that puts...
See, I don't like this guy's interpretation, because what Ibn Khaldun is describing could have been a reality. Now, was he generalizing? Yeah, he was generalizing. But I also see like where his thought process comes from, the way he thinks. Like one is connected to, well, actually, he knows how to separate his ideas from certain religious doctrines of his time. And to go even further, he seems like he's more aware of certain scriptures and doctrines than the people who are pushing the misinformation are. So Ibn Khaldun, he connects these ideas about human traits and characteristics to climates, quite simply. And he gives climates 3 and 4 essentially as the preferred zone, and says this is the climate where the people are most civilized, has produced the greatest achievements in civilization and architecture, produced all the prophets. And he would probably go further to think that humanity originates there, right, according to his belief. But he says that people from the climates 1 and 2, which are where the Negroes inhabit, when the Negroes go to the preferred climate or the cold climate, which would be 6 and 7, their descendants produce a lighter color. This is where I would have to disagree with Ibn Khaldun, or go deeper, try to figure out what he's actually trying to say. I would like to know, did Ibn Khaldun think that just naturally Black people existing in a colder climate makes them lighter through some environmental process, or is that because these Black people are mating with white people? Let me see if the AI could give me an answer to this, because this is the debate I get into with evolutionists and stuff like this. All right, I'm about to talk to AI, y'all. All right, in Ibn Khaldun's work, he talks about the different climatic zones and how they affect the physical characteristics and even like emotional positions of people. So in one of his arguments, or one of his claims, he basically says that when Negroes find themselves in the different climatic zones, their descendants produce a lighter skin color. Can you explain what he meant by this?
It sounds like you're referencing a controversial and outdated idea related to climatic determinism. The notion that environmental factors such as climate can shape physical and even psychological traits of human populations. In this context, the claim you're mentioning suggests that when people of a darker skin tone moved into regions with different climate conditions, often cooler or less sunny, their descendants allegedly became lighter over time. It's important to note that this theory has been widely discredited. Modern genetics and anthropology show that skin color is primarily influenced by genetic factors and the amount of ultraviolet radiation in the environment, rather than a simple process of gradual adaptation over generations. In other words, the shift in skin color is not simply caused by moving to different climates. The idea you're discussing reflects past attempts to justify racial hierarchies, and it's not supported by current scientific understanding.
See?
If you're exploring these topics, it's key to approach them critically and recognize the
See?
broader context.
This is where
developed. Would you like to delve deeper into the history or the current perspective on these
See,
ideas?
that right there. I always disagree with this nigga Truist about this shit. Oh, it takes time. It's generations, thousands and thousands of years. Yo, the AI just said that's not true. Let me read what she said again. It sounds like you're referencing a controversial and outdated idea related to climatic determinism. The notion that environmental factors such as climate can shape physical and even psychological traits of human populations. In this context, the claim you're mentioning suggests that when people of a darker skin tone moved into regions with different climate conditions, often cooler or less sunny, their descendants allegedly became lighter over time. The evolutionists, Kareem, Truist, all the other Pan-Africans on YouTube, they gonna get that wrong. I don't even be claiming science, but I did some reading. You know, I know certain ideas. I know the ideas. Modern genetics and anthropology show that skin color is primarily influenced by genetic factors, which is my belief, in the amount of ultraviolet radiation in the environment, rather than a simple process of gradual adaptation over generations. In other words, the shift in skin color is not simply caused by moving to different climates. I'm gonna have her talk more about this. Tell me more about this science behind skin color and ultraviolet radiation. I know there's a lady, Nina Jablonski. I read an article about hers years ago. I watched a TED talk on her years ago where she goes into this. But I want you to compare, you know, maybe a Nina Jablonski's ideas to Ibn Khaldun versus what the actual modern science says.
Sure thing. Let's break it down. First, Ibn Khaldun's perspective was rooted in the idea of climatic determinism, that environmental conditions like heat and sunlight directly shaped physical traits such as skin color, darker and hotter climates and lighter and cooler ones. Now, contrast that with modern science, particularly the work of people like Nina Jablonski. She argues that skin color evolved primarily as an adaptation to varying levels of ultraviolet UV radiation. In areas with high UV radiation, darker skin protects against harmful effects like folate degradation. In areas with less UV, lighter skin helps with vitamin D synthesis since there's less sunlight. So, skin color variation is about balancing protection from UV and ensuring vitamin D production, not just shifting with climate alone. In short, Ibn Khaldun attributed changes to climate directly, while Jablonski emphasizes UV radiation and genetic adaptation. It's a shift from environmental determinism to more nuanced biological perspective. Would you like to explore more on this topic?
As it pertains to Jablonski's idea about adaptation, would she support the idea that Ibn Khaldun posited? Would she support that when Negro populations migrate and live in colder climates, that their descendants would naturally become lighter? Would she support this idea?
No, Nina Jablonski does not support that idea. Her work emphasizes that human skin color evolved as an adaptation primarily to varying levels of ultraviolet radiation. In regions with high UV radiation, darker skin protects against damage. In regions with lower UV, lighter skin allows for more efficient production of vitamin D. Jablonski argues against racial or hierarchical interpretations of skin color changes. In short, modern science does not support the idea that populations lighten in cooler climates simply due to migration.
Okay, I kind of wonder if the AI even fully understood. The AI is not always that smart.
Things out of context, but it also undermines the achievements of the medieval Muslim world. Viewing Ibn Khaldun as somehow separated from his time and place and his culture, and put in some kind of modern narrative, paints a picture that the time in which he lived was indeed unenlightened or sort of intellectually lacking, which is simply just not true. Nonetheless, Ibn Khaldun is a very important and interesting figure that deserves a lot more time than this to go through properly. But I hope you have at least enjoyed this short dive into his world and his works. I may not be the most frequent uploader on this here YouTube, but if you do have any suggestions for future episodes or ideas, then I would love to hear them. So just leave them in a comment or something. In any case, I do have some ideas myself, so there'll probably be some future videos that I have planned. Thank you for listening.
So I think I'm gonna put on a video about like the Timbuktu Chronicles. I'm or maybe even the Oyo. You know, bring up something on the Oyo. Oyo Empire. Because I got to get an idea, like a full picture on, you know, the time. Basic Nigerian history. Rano spirit. Okay, let's see what this dude is talking about. Gonna give us some basic Nigerian history.
Full Sail University is where the next generation of creators are learning to build the future.
I'm gonna step away while the video's playing. I'll be in the background, but make me some lunch. Really brunch. I want something a little bit more. Oh, he got some visuals. I'll let him rock out.
Hello everybody, my name is Dr. Cartel. Welcome to another episode of Basic Nigerian History. Now, last episode we spoke about the Benin Kingdom. One thing we mentioned was that the origin story of the kingdom was mixed with that of the Yoruba lands, but we didn't fully explain how. Well, you're in luck, because in this episode we're going to discuss those same Yoruba lands in the form of the Oyo Empire. Let's get started. Let's begin with the origin story for the Oyo Empire. It is said that the land of Ife was founded by Ododuwa, even though people had been living there since the 9th century. Some legends say it came from God or even Mecca. Other legends agree that it was a prince from the Edo Benin Kingdom, even though they still see him as a god. Now, there are two versions as to how Ife, the land of Ife, was founded. The first version is that the god Obatala.
Could you use up to $800? Find it at BioLife. Up to $800 is waiting for you. Just donate plasma, get paid for each donation the same day, then treat yourself and treat your friends. Schedule your
was already in the land, but then it was invaded by a group led by Ododuwa and defeated. The second version is according to the Yoruba religion, which says that the supreme god Olodumare had sent Obatala, who was the king of the Orishas, to create land after he had already created the Yoruba people. Now, Obatala agreed, but somehow he discovers palm wine on his way, and he proceeds to get drunk on palm wine and fall asleep. So Ododuwa, his younger brother, comes to finish the job and replaces him with the blessings from Olodumare. And because of this, there is everlasting conflict between Ododuwa and Obatala. I'll leave it up to you to decide which of the stories are more likely to be true. Anyways, by the 12th century, Ife had become a regional power and had built labor-intensive roads as well as elaborate bronze sculptures. Ile-Ife, which means the land of Ife, became the center of the Yoruba identity and gained spiritual importance because of Ododuwa. Dioni of Ife, also known as the king of Ife, served as a spiritual leader for other communities. Now, if you remember in the last episode, we mentioned that Oramiyan, who was the son or the grandson of Ododuwa, left Ife to return to Igodo, the Edo state, but after having a baby, he then left and came back to the land of Ife. Well, soon after he came back to the land of Ife, he only just packed up his stuff and left to go to Oyo. And in Oyo, he married another woman and this time gave birth to two sons. The two sons were Ajaka and Shango. He left Ajaka in charge. To be honest, this guy, I don't understand him. Like, he needs to make up his mind. He keeps going to places, having babies and leaving and coming back. Like, anyways, he left Ajaka and just returned to the land of Ife. Ajaka became the first Alaafin of Oyo, and all subsequent kings, therefore, were direct descendants of God, because they were descendants from Oramion, who was descendants from Ododuwa, who was descendants from Olodumare. So all subsequent kings therefore had a divine right to rule. By the 14th century, Oyo had grown into a formidable inland power, and by the end of this century, it had begun expanding its borders at the expense of its neighbors. One of these neighbors were the Nupe people. And in 1535, the Nupe people flipped. They were like, no, we're not having it. They invaded and occupied Oyo, forcing the royal family to take refuge in the Bogu lands to the west, and they sacked and destroyed Oyo as a regional power until the 17th century. In the late 16th century, under Ajiboyede, Oyo defeated the Nupe and reclaimed the land of the Oyo people. He held the first Bere festival, an event to celebrate peace in the kingdom. The festival will be held regularly for many years to come. In the early 17th century, after defeating the Nupe people, the people of Oyo re-established Oyo as a more centralized and expansive power than before. They were like, now we're really going to show you people who the true boss is. Oyo became the most populous Yoruba kingdom. Their key strength was in a stronger military core, cavalry and armor. They even tried to conquer the Benin Empire, but they failed multiple times. However, to secure their borders, they left buffer areas autonomous. This basically means they ensured the lands between the two empires remained independent, so that neither the Oyo Empire or the Benin Kingdom could claim the lands. The Oyo Empire made their money through the trading ecosystem, and subjugated states were paying tributes to them. They also got lots of wealth by heavily taxing both the Hausa traders and the forest zone traders trying to pass through the Oyo territory. In the end, most merchants found it more economically beneficial to sell the wares directly to Oyo instead of passing through. Now, let's just give you a quick breakdown of how the Oyo Empire was set up. The leader of the empire was the Alaafin, which basically translates to the owner of the palace or the king of the palace. The Aremo, which means the eldest son of the king, was the king of the general public, as the Alaafin rarely left the palace. So the Aremo would deal with general public matters, but if it was matters that was taken care of in the palace, the Alaafin would deal with it. The Alaafin had supreme authority and could make policy decisions, settle disputes between sub-rulers, and order executions and create or give titles. He also had the Ilari at his disposal. The Ilari were eunuchs that acted as both spies and tax collectors for the empire. But the Alaafin wasn't all powerful. The Oyomesi were a check on his power. They were a council of politicians that were supposed to act as the voice of politicians or noblemen and also speak up for the interests of the empire. At the beginning of the empire, the Aremo used to succeed his father to the throne, but this led to some sons hastening the deaths of their fathers. So it was decided that the Oyomesi would select the next Alaafin. The Alaafin couldn't be legally deposed, so if the Oyomesi weren't happy with the performance of the Alaafin, they had to compel him to commit suicide. Now I bet you're thinking, oh my god, how did they do that? Well, this was done through an annual festival called the Omu Festival, where the Oyomesi would decide if they approved of the Alaafin's behavior and decision-making skills over the past year. If they were happy, the Bashong, who was the leader of the Oyomesi, would present the Alaafin with an empty calabash. This signified that everything was cool and it didn't have to worry. However, if they decided that they no longer approved of the king, the Bashong would present the Alaafin with a dish of parrot egg and say, the gods reject you, the people reject you, and the earth reject you. Obviously, he wouldn't say it in English, he would say it in Yoruba. But this would signify that the Alaafin should now commit suicide. The Aremo, who was the oldest son of the Alaafin, and the Asamu, who was the Alaafin's personal counselor, would also have to commit suicide along with him in order to completely renew the government. The Oyomesi compelled many Alaafin to commit suicides during the 17th and 18th century, and once they got rid of one, they went about trying to find another one. They tended to select a weak Alaafin after the reign of a strong one in order to stop the office of the Alaafin from being too powerful. The Bashong had final say on nominations of the new Alaafin, which gave him great power, and he was also the commander-in-chief of the army. You will see how this become a problem in a future episode when we meet a Basharun that single-handedly weakens and destabilizes the empire because of his greed for power. The Ogboni were a council of old and distinguished religious importance free men. They were supposed to be the voice of the general people and represented popular opinion. They also had the authority in religion and were greatly respected. They were responsible for judging any case that involved bloodshed, and their leader, Dioluwo, had the right of direct access to the Alaafin at any time. The empire was divided into 4 layers. The first layer was the original Oyo state, the hub of the empire. It was split into 6 provinces, 3 on the west of the Ogun River and 3 on the east. Each province had a governor appointed by the Alaafin, and they spoke Yoruba in the Oyo dialect. The second layer were the Yoruba lands to the south. These were the towns that were closest to the Oyo state, and they spoke Yoruba in a different dialect to that of the Oyo people. They paid tribute to the empire, and their own rulers were called Obas. Each Oba also had to be confirmed by the Alaafin. The third layer was the Egbado corridor, which was southwest of the Yoruba land, inhabited by the Egba and the Egbado people. Its job was to ensure Oyo's trade with the coast. They were also allowed to be independent like the Yoruba lands as long as they paid tributes. They were supervised by agents of the Alaafin known as Ajele or Ajele, whichever one. And the fourth and final layer was the Aja land. It was the last to be added to the empire and was the furthest from the empire as well as the most resistive. It stretched from the west of the Egbado corridor into a way which is in modern-day Togo and had to be kept in line with regular threats. They were also allowed a fair degree of independence so long as they paid their taxes to the empire. Oyo punished any disobedience from the Aja land by wholesale slaughter of their communities. Oyo was Hello everybody, my name is Dr. Katel and welcome to another episode of Basic Nigerian History. By now, we have covered multiple different groups of people in the era that would eventually become Nigeria. But there's many more peoples left to cover. Unfortunately, I will not be covering each and every single one, hence why this series is called Basic Nigerian History and not Nigerian History series. I would like to move on to the next stage of history, but before I do, let's use this episode to do a quick summary of the different people in the area. In the area that would eventually become Nigeria, trade was the most important factor linking all different societies and peoples together. No one society could be solely independent and it had to rely on the others around it for things it didn't have. This meant good interstate relationship was important, so trade routes were the joint responsibility of the different states. Intermarriages was another common practice among the societies, which helped spread people from different backgrounds around. Cultural activities like festivals, foods, words from different languages circulated all over the community lines and across states and incorporated themselves into the various states. As we know, connections of states can be found in their origin stories. Even though many myths such as the Hausa talk about the founder being from an outside or a migrant or an outsider, many others say that the founder was from within, and the founder always met an already established society in place. Example are the Nupe, who trace their origin to an Igala prince, and the Igala have traditions that link them with the Yoruba. The Idoma claim descent from Junkun, who in turn claim a shared origin with Kanem. The Efik claim origin from intermarriage between the Igbo and the Ibibio, and the Yoruba claim that they were founded by an Oba from Benin. And of course, the Yoruba and Benin claim a link to Oramiyan and Ododua. As well as trade and marriage, migration also occurred due to war or even the slave trade. Speaking of the slave trade, this is a good time to talk about slavery in Africa before the Europeans arrived. Now, slavery in Africa was different to what is now known when we think of slavery. It wasn't chattel slavery, but it was more integrative. Slaves in the area that would become Nigeria tended to be assimilated into their new societies and perform tasks similar to those performed by free men and women. Don't forget, all Askers were sons of concubines, which basically meant that they were female slaves. Furthermore, among the Mosi and the Wolof people, army generals were chosen systematically from slaves. Slaves were traded on the trans-Saharan trade routes for centuries before the Europeans came, and were considered perfect for the trade routes because the further a slave traveled, the more valuable he or she was. They didn't spoil, they were self-transporting, and they could also help carry stuff if needed during the long journey. For example, if an animal died or was lost. Now, the exact number of slaves traded on the Trans-Saharan trade routes is unknown, but from 650 to 1600, it was estimated to be about 4.8 million. Now, the real number could be half of this or significantly higher, because the range was between 3,000 and 8,000 slaves traded per year. Up north, the Hausa states and the Kanem Borno kingdom regularly had conflicts with their neighbors, and as they fought for dominance over the trade routes, capturing slaves in these raids and wars became a tactic and a goal. They then sold these captives for profits. Now, we all know that slavery in itself is wrong, and no one would defend such a practice in this day and age. However, it would be unfair if I didn't mention that the slaves traded on the Trans-Saharan trade routes weren't treated like chattel, as Islam had many rules governing the taking, treating, and freeing of slaves. For example, only non-Muslims could be taken as slaves, so a lot of the societies that had accepted Islam, like the Hausa Kingdom or the Kanem Borno Empire, mainly got their slaves from down south, although sometimes they still took each other as slaves in the raids. In the northern region, young female slaves were the most abundantly traded on the Trans-Saharan trade routes as a harem for wealthy Muslim men, and over time they integrated themselves into the society through marriage or childbirth. Women couldn't be sold once they gave birth to their first child, and if a slave woman did give birth, that child would be free at birth. Furthermore, if a free man wanted to have children with a slave woman, he had to marry her first, which would mean freeing her, although a lot of people chose to ignore this rule and just had children with slave women without marrying them. The freeing of slaves was common penance for sins, and because the giving of alms was regularly mandatory in Islam, freeing of slaves was commonly used as an act of generosity. For the Hausa kingdom's constant warfare against each other, slaves were incredibly important. They acted as soldiers, guards, labor, and in some cases, like in Kanem Borno, they were sold on the Trans-Saharan trade routes for guns and horses. Kingdoms that won got more slaves, which in turn meant more economic progress. Further down south, in the southwest, where the Oyo Empire resides, slaves were often extremely important aspects of the society, providing the bureaucratic and military backbone, like the Ilari eunuchs that acted as spies and tax collectors for the empires.
If you live in a Massachusetts zip code and have 0 DUIs in the last 5 years, listen carefully. I've been an insurance agent for 30 years, and what I'm about to tell you could help you cut your auto insurance costs dramatically. Here's what the industry doesn't.
A lot of slaves were trained as soldiers and rose to prominent position. They weren't a separate class, and they tended to be dependents of the owning family and to do the same type of work that other family members did. 3 eunuchs were the most senior titled slaves and were the second highest authority after the Alaafin in 3 matters. The Ona Irefa, which is the eunuch in the middle, was the highest in judicial matters. He handed down legal rulings in place of the Alaafin. The Otun Irefa, which is the eunuch of the right, was the highest in religious matters and in charge of the court of Shango. The Osi Irefa, which is the eunuch of the left, was the highest in administrative matters and collected revenues, served as the Alaafin's proxy in dealing with the courts. Not to mention, all of the Ilari was under his command and reported to him as well as the Alaafin on matters of the provinces they were in. Now, the duties of slaves being so important and distributed meant that the empire could remain stable through periods of instability or during a reign of a rubbish Alaafin. Also, because these people were slaves and had no lineage, it meant that they couldn't acquire any power on their own, and they could be trusted completely with no fear of ambitious scheming. In the southeast area, slaves were an important force in the political economy. They were farmers, laborers, and even slave raiders and traders in their own right. Some even became exceedingly wealthy and powerful leaders in their communities. In other areas further down south, slaves that had been stripped of kingship ties could be sold for money, traded for goods, given as gifts or tributes, or used as a sacrificial offering in traditional religious settings. The ability to integrate into kinship networks and be regularly freed in slave systems meant that slaves were generally not a self-reproducing pool. It wasn't something that carried on past one generation, and as a result, the markets for buying and selling of slaves always existed. Now, let's do a conclusion of what we've learned. We've learned that although there was a large diverse mix of people in Nigeria, the people had a close working relationship with each other and intermingled and intermarried. We also learned that slavery had been going on in Africa long before the Europeans arrived. However, it was a different form of slavery, one in which the slaves weren't treated like chattel, and they did the same work as ordinary free men and free women. Although there were many ways in which a slave could rise up in society and become...
I just want to say, I disagree. This dude is like, sound like he's trying to excuse slavery. You know what I mean? So I got to disagree with him. I just want to put that out there. You know, I just got to put that out there. Here we go. I'm going to listen to another video. Just let it keep rocking out.
Why waste?
Hello my beautiful people, my name is Dr. Cartel. Welcome to another episode of Basic Nigerian History. Now, the Portuguese were most likely the first Europeans to arrive on the West African coast, and they started by raiding for slaves. The earliest account I was able to find of the Europeans taking slaves in Africa was around 1442, when the Portuguese raided the West African coast and captured 12 Africans, which they sent back to their rulers as a gift. The Africans put up a surprisingly dangerous fight, but one of the 12 that was captured was a royal. The Portuguese found this out, brought him back, and offered to trade him for 10 other Africans. We don't know exactly how this trade happened, but basically the king of that area agreed. Safe to say, this wasn't a trade, it was kidnap and ransom. In around 1447, there's a record of African armies, which was probably the Mali Empire, destroying a Portuguese fleet off the coast of the Goree Island, even though they didn't have the weapons to match the guns and cannons of the Portuguese. In 1455, it was recorded that the Pope issued a law authorizing Portugal to reduce all infidels people to servitude. And in 1482, the ruler of the Gold Coast, basically the ruler of Ghana at that time, refused the Portuguese permission to build a castle. But they did it anyways, so he sent an army to stop them. Now, in response to that, they not only wiped out the army that he sent, but they also destroyed the villages with their rapid cannon fire. In 1488, the Portuguese arrived in Congo and conquered its people. They then used both their military and their missionaries to force the rulers to convert. The ruler of Congo would then send members of his family to Portugal to learn and bring back knowledge and goods just to please the Portuguese. But then, sometimes people wouldn't come back, and people were going missing from his land. Vasco da Gama, who was a Portuguese sailor that had explored to find a path to the Indian Ocean so that they could enjoy the trade that was happening in India, made it around Africa by 1498 and into Calicut in India. By the time he arrived, trade was already happening fluidly without them. So in order to force themselves into the trade, the Portuguese began capturing trading posts and forcing everybody to buy a license to trade at the post that they had already captured. So they were basically glorified pirates. Now, Portugal's success in raiding the African coast and eventually making it to India inspired Christopher Columbus to do the same. However, he famously got lost and ended up in the Americas, calling the indigenous people Indians because he thought he had reached the East Indies, which is Indonesia. He wasn't able to find any gold or spices, but he did discover the Americas. Notice I say discover in quotes because obviously people were living there. He just went there and massacred everyone. So, moving on. The Portuguese then challenged the Spanish on the basis that the Pope had already authorized them to reduce every single infidel in the world to servitude. The Pope didn't authorize the Spanish to do it. The Pope authorized the Portuguese to do it. So then they were like, no, Christopher Columbus can't be doing that So then they were like, no, the Spanish can't be going over there and owning that place. We were the one given the responsibility and it is our job to do. So in 1493, the Spanish and the Portuguese took their disputes to the Pope. So the Pope drew a line down the center of the world and gave the west to Spain and east to Portugal in order to solve the beef. He was like, okay, Spain can reduce all the infidels in the west part of the world to servitude, and Portuguese will do the same to people in the east. The two countries agreed to this and started doing their thing. But in 1497, England joined the rat race. They were like, everybody's getting into this thing. We want to be a part of it. We want to feel among. So they headed to North America, and the other European nations quickly followed suit. France and Netherlands and the rest of them. Things were moving fast. After the discovery of the Americas and the establishment of plantation labor, the Europeans needed slaves.
Hey boss, just arrived on site. Gearing up now.
Time theft. It's costing your business. With Connect Team's GPS clock-ins, you'll avoid overpayment and stop guessing who's where. And come payroll time, one click and boom, you're done. Zero mistakes. You'll also ditch paperwork for digital forms your crew actually fills out on their phone. Get schedules out in minutes with all the job details so everyone knows what they're doing. Important site update? Send it in seconds and know it's seen, no chasing or follow-ups. Plus, there's even a
drastically. So they started using the natives as slaves. And in 1517, Bartolomeu de las Casas, who I'm guessing was a Portuguese or Spanish person, I don't even know. Anyways, he witnessed the genocide and torture of Native Americans at the hands of the Spanish. So he wrote to the Pope and the King of Spain to stop what the Spanish were doing, as the Native Americans
My bad. I don't know what's going on with this. But nah, this is interesting. It's making me think. It's making me think a lot, man. Because it seemed like back then, everyone was running around claiming, nah, this is such and such land. This is such and such land. No, this is such and such land. You need to pay tribute. Like, that's how they was moving in the medieval times, the Middle Ages. In a lot of ways, we shouldn't bear the responsibility of the ancestors. We should only be held responsible for what we do. A lot of where we are is because of people of the past. I just want to put that out there. What's that movie with Martin Lawrence? There's a movie where he plays a Moor. Martin is called a Moor throughout Black Knight. Yeah, that's a good movie. Let me play this clip. All the Moors love this clip right here. Yeah, I remember this movie when I was younger. Long Live the Queen. All right, let's play this one. I got to go back and watch the whole thing. I might throw that on today. Just watch the whole thing. All right, they got me on pause. I'm gonna play this last clip. It take like a minute. Let me take the screen down. But I ain't go nowhere. Just ate my brunch. If I'm really gonna be a beast today, all I gotta do is go back to the gym, do laundry, then get some work done. That'll be the perfect day right there. Sometimes a nigga just want to be lazy, not do nothing. But we'll see. It's only 2 o'clock. I got my studying in for like 3-4 hours, damn near. So that's done for the day. I'm gonna watch this last clip as soon as they let me out this jam. Still waiting. They ain't see. I'm gonna get to the bottom of this, man. I got this curiosity, man. This curiosity in me. I gotta have the answers. This shit taking too long. You know what? I'm putting the video back up. I'm just gonna play it anyway, whether it's live or not live.